You are listening to the Technical Foul Podcast for Wednesday, March 28th, 2018. I am your host, Manny Fresh, and I am back again with another episode of the podcast. Man, I can't believe it's almost April, man. Does anybody feel like this year has just been flying by? Like, we're already in April, man. It's crazy. I don't know. The older you get, the years just start freaking flying as fast. Like, to all the kids that listen to the show, man, listen. Stay young. Don't be so quick to grow up. Yo, I remember when I was a kid, when I was like 12, 13, I just wanted to be 20, 25, 30, just be on my own, be a grown up, be an adult. Bro, stay a child. The years just fly by. It literally feels like 2 days ago was January 1st and I was watching the Rose Bowl. And now it's like April. It's crazy. It really is crazy. But what up, everybody? Another episode of the podcast this week, and it's a special episode. Got a special guest coming on the podcast a little later, a couple minutes. A guy that I've been following his work for a while. A huge fan of his podcast, fellow Duke fan and a Met fan, so obviously we connected. Dan Labriola, host of the Duke Nation podcast, will join us on the show a little bit later to talk about, obviously, that horrific, heartbreaking gut punch of a loss we experienced on Sunday. I won't even get into it here because I'm trying to save my talking points for when Dan comes on the show. But I will say this: if you're a Duke fan, that's a loss that is going to haunt you for a long time. It just is. It's similar if you guys were alive or watching Duke or following Duke to the loss in the Final Four in '99. To UConn. That type of loss, that loss that you'll think about. Even, it doesn't matter how many national championships we win after this will still be a loss that you'll still think back on and just say, how do we lose this game? It's just, terrible. But I won't get into that. I'll save that for Dan. But what I will get into is tomorrow is finally the day. Opening day of the 2018 Major League Baseball season. The boys of summer are finally back. Thank fucking God. Of course, I've missed my boys. I've missed baseball, of course. And you guys know how I feel. You guys know my thoughts on baseball. I've said it before on this show, much to the chagrin of my co-hosts, Luke's and Jut, in the past. At its highest level, I think baseball is the best sport. I really do. I stand by that statement. I'm not the only one that said that, obviously, but I just believe it. I think that at its highest level, everything being equal, I still think baseball at its highest level, there's nothing that can touch it. It just isn't. There's nothing like a Major League Baseball postseason game. Just the drama, the intensity, the way things can change at a drop of a hat. It's just amazing. And coming off the season that we had last year with the amazing postseason and even more amazing World Series that the Astros and the Dodgers had, baseball's got some juice for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, we talked about the postseason and the World Series, but I think the offseason this year has brought a lot of attention to the game. Maybe for good reasons, maybe for bad reasons, who knows? I guess wherever you stand in that argument, I think you'll fall one way or another. But I think it's brought some juice to the game. I mean, I think the offseason or the lack of activity this offseason with free agency has caused a lot of conversation. And it's weird because I'm of two minds of this, and I really am. I'm of two minds with this whole situation. The inactivity is weird because I've never seen an offseason like this. I've never seen an offseason where, so many, I don't want to say great players, good players. And that also falls into the argument of this free agency class. Was it really a good free agency class? Was it a whack free agency class? Was it a overrated free agency class? I don't know. I tend to think that this was a pretty fair, especially when you look at this class compared to other free agency classes we've had in the past. I think this is a pretty standard, pretty average to above average class compared to some of the other past years. I mean, and these things tend to go in ebbs and flows. I mean, some years you have amazing free agency classes, like next year's free agency class is highlighted by obviously Bryce Harper and Machado and Donaldson and Kershaw. So compared to that, this year's class was a step below, but I think this free agency class had some good players. And And just the inactivity. Really, we didn't really get a flurry of moves till late February. Really, when you think about it, right before spring training started, that's when you started really getting the flurry of the moves. And like I said before, I'm of two minds at this. And let me get this out of the way. I don't think there's collusion. I don't think that there's a strike loom. I know the players have talked all their shit about, they're not happy with how things have unfolded. They're not happy with the inactivity. They're not happy with tanking. They're not happy with the Marlins and their situation. Look, players can say whatever the hell they want. The fact of the matter is, the last collective bargaining negotiation, the players got their asses handed to them. And I've said this on the show. They got their asses handed to them. Tony Clark did a horrific job. And as much as I couldn't stand Fear and Warzone, those guys in the 90s, because I felt like they were the opposite, where everything was about trying to protect the players and keep the players at a high level and keep the players' leverage over the owners above anything else, almost to the detriment of the game. Those guys knew what they were doing. And to me, Tony Clark came off as an amateur, and he got his ass handed to him by the owners. And my thing is, when you get beat on the negotiating table, and I say this about NFL players all the time too, NFL players constantly complain about Goodell having all this power and the power to be judge, jury, and executioner, yet every CBA negotiation, they let him keep the power. It's not a sticking point for them. So when you lose the negotiation battle, I can't listen to you complain about, we're getting screwed and there's collusion. You can't argue. If I sit down on a table with you and I collectively come to an agreement on a framework on how we're going to run a league and how a relationship between players and owners is going to exist, and I sign off on it, I can't complain. You signed up for it. You signed up for it. It's not like you signed up for something that you didn't know. It was collectively bargained. Everything had to be in writing. So you knew that this was how it was going to play out. The owners have leverage. And I don't believe that it's collusion. I think a lot of this is cyclical. I think that you have years where owners have leverages and you have years when players have leverage. And it comes all around. I think you can make the argument for the last 25 years that players have had the leverage. Really, since the strike, players have had leverage over the owners. I don't even think it's hard to argue that. But the players, I can't listen to them complain. It's my basic point. But that being said, this has been a weird offseason. And a lot of people have called it the sabermetric offseason and really where sabermetrics have really taken over the game. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say this. And you guys know how much I hate analytics and how much I hate sabermetrics. So with that being said, if the one positive thing, if the one great thing that comes out of sabermetrics and the rise of it in baseball, that we finally start evaluating players the right way, then I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Because I, like many fans, have been fed up with the inordinate amount of contracts or high contracts that these players have been getting. And then here's my problem with the players as well. They don't complain when the Jason Bays of the world, when the Robinson Canoes, when the Pujols of the world get these inordinate, just completely just albatross contracts that are bound to fail and never going to live up to their hype. They never complain about those. I never hear a player say, damn, Kevin Brown got $100 million. He's not going to live up to that. And I get it. They're not going to throw their brethren under their bus like that. I understand that. But these players never complain when their brethren get these big time contracts and never live up to them. And they basically put their team in a hole for seemingly a decade. I don't hear any players complaining about Albert Pujols. And I love Pujols, a whole future first ballot Hall of Famer. This isn't a slight against Pujols, but his contract is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I haven't heard too many players complain about Albert Pujols and his contract. So it's okay when you're getting the money and you're getting all the years thrown into it. Everything is good. Let's pat ourselves on the back. We win for us. It's a win for us. But when the owners finally get smart and say, hold up, I can't afford to give, it's one thing to go out there and pay an Albert Pujols, a guy who at least has a resume, a 10-year deal. That's bad enough. But when I'm asked to go out here and give marginal players above, sometimes more, when marginal players are exceeding the market and basically creating their own market and getting these inordinate contracts, that's where the shit is getting crazy. That's where it's getting crazy. So I love that owner. Now, I don't want to say that they've smartened up because next offseason will be the real test. We'll see next year if these owners have smartened up. We'll see next year because for all the shit that we're talking about now, all it takes is a dumb owner next year to go out there and give Josh Donaldson a $200 million deal for 10 years. Even Harper, Harper's what, 26? I'd have to think long and hard about giving him a 10-year deal. I really would. So next year will really be the determining factor. If this is a new trend here to stay, or is this just a one-year anomaly? But a lot of back and forth has been had on the offseason and the lack of player activity and the fact that big-name players are still available or big-name players got completely below what has there been a guy that took more of an L than Mike Moustakas? And I'm not a big Moustakas fan. I think he's overrated. I never believe. Matter of fact, I was going to have a conniption if anybody gave Mike Moustakas more than $100 million. If anybody gave him even Sandoval money, I was going to have a conniption because I'm just not a big fan of Moustakas. To me, he's one of those guys. He had a career year, his walk year, so that tells me a lot. And he's not a great hitter, strikes out a ton, doesn't walk a lot. I'm not a big Moustakas guy. But he took an L. This is a guy that got a qualifying offer, so he would have made $17 million had he accepted it. And he waited, played his hand, and he got fucked. Excuse my French, but he got burned. He got burned. There's no other way to put it. He got burned. And he had to re-sign with the Royals for a 1-year, $6 million deal. And of course, at that point, he went from getting $17 million to $6 million. That's a huge loss. Huge loss. I think that's what he signed for, $6 million. It could be less. But he signed for $6 million. So he took an ultimate loss. So the offseason has been interesting, but as we kick off the start of the season, obviously there's been a lot of talk about, tanking in baseball and the Super Seven, the 7 magnificent teams. Let me attack the Super 7 theory first. So there's this idea that really for the first time in a long time that, baseball is really a haves and have-not sport. That you have 7 really good teams, then a couple teams in the middle, and then there's just a bunch of dreck. And while I agree with the teams in the bottom being drecks, the notion that there's 7 really good teams and that there's a guarantee that these 7 teams are going to make the playoffs. I think it's a fallacy. I think it's a false narrative. I don't understand why the media has taken this and ran with it because I just don't buy it. I think every year, if you were to go back every year and look at on paper the season, you were always going to have teams that you felt on paper were really good. Like, there wasn't even a debate. Like, oh, if this team plays well, if this team does this, that, and the other, they're going to be this. They're going to be that. So I struggle with this notion that, and if you guys haven't been following the offseason, the notion that the Cubs, the Nationals, the Dodgers in the NL, and in the AL, you have the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Astros, and the Indians as the 7 really great, or at least very good to great teams that are guaranteed to be in the playoffs, and everybody else is kind of fighting for a couple of wild card spots. And I just don't buy into that because, first of all, we can look on paper and say, oh, this team is going to do this, and this team is going to go do that, and this team is going to be this, and blah, blah, blah. That's fine. That's fine. But the fact is, we don't know. I can sit here right now and tell you that, yeah, the Yankees are going to win the AL East, and it's like they might as well just hand them the trophy this year because it's just, I don't know that. And I'll get into my predictions here in a second, but I don't know that. It's a 162 game season. A lot of things can happen. Guys can get hurt. Guys can have career years. Guys can have years that they just career worse years, I should say. Not live up to expectations, not live up to numbers that they've put up in the past. All those things can happen. And sometimes there's just years that teams come out of nowhere and surprise. Look at last year. Last year was a perfect example. Who expected the Brewers to do what they did? Who expected the Twins to have the season that they had? Nobody. So the notion that there's a Super 7 and that there's everybody else, I think it's a false prophecy that's been put out there by the baseball media. I'm not sure I buy it. I really don't. And even the 7 teams, I think they're all flawed teams. I don't think there's a perfect team in that mix there, and I'll get into it. But I don't think there's a perfect team in there. Now the Drex, we know the Drex. We know the Reds are going to be fucking horrible. We know the Marlins are going to be. And this idea that the Marlins were wrong to tear it down because, look at what they're doing to that mark. First of all, they don't have any fans. Everybody knows the Marlins have no fan base. They're in a terrible market. Miami has proven once again that it's not a sports town. It's definitely not a baseball town. And it's a shitty baseball, and it's a shitty sports town. They don't come out. They don't support that team. They've never supported that team. And this idea that they broke up some really good team. No, they weren't. That was a team. I watched that team all the time. Every year. That team at best is a 75-7. It won 77 games last year. That's not a great team. That wasn't a team on the verge of anything. They're not that good. Now, I agree Jeter's been a fuck up since he's gotten there and he's done some things wrong. And the jury's still out whether Jeter's going to be the guy, if he's going to have a Jordan-esque type run where he's going to be a phenomenal player and then be a shitty executive. We'll see about that. Right now it's looking like that's the case, but we'll see. But I can't blame anybody in that new Miami ownership for saying, hey, we got to tear this shit down because it's not working. It's not working. And I know there's a lot of aspects that went into that, but it's just not, it hasn't worked. Not to mention they were like $50 million in debt. Anybody that's criticizing the Marlins for what they did, it just doesn't understand what the hell is going on. But we know that they're going to be Drex. I don't buy into the aspect that, that there's just going to be halves and that there's 7 just really good teams that we should just pencil those guys in. I just don't buy that. As far as my predictions, we'll start in the NL. I'll start in the NL East. I think the Nationals will win the division, but I don't think the Nationals are a lock as anybody else thinks. First of all, I think it's now or never for the Nationals. I think this is the year where it's gotta be World Series or bust for that franchise. This run, this 6-year window that they've had that started in 2012, it's got to culminate with something this year. Because if it doesn't, then it's over. Harper leaves. You might as well break it up. Scherzer's 34 years old. He's thrown a lot of innings, a lot of wear and tear on that shoulder. And he's still great and he's still dynamic. I get that. But eventually, you got to believe age is going to start to show, even a little bit. Strasburg is one injury away from being out. And their pitching staff is not that great. I don't love the rest of the rotation. Gio Gonzalez, Tanner Roark, really? Their bullpen still hasn't been improved. I like Doolittle, but everybody else is a question mark at best in that bullpen. So I don't think the Nationals are this juggernaut that everybody makes them out to be. I think they'll win the division, but I can see my Mets knocking them off. I'm not sold on the Phillies just yet. I'm not ready to go there with the Phillies just yet. I know everybody's all gun ho on the Phillies and the Phillies are this and Rhys Hoskins and, look, can Rhys Hoskins play 162 games before I'm ready to commit all the way to Rhys Hoskins? I've seen these guys that come up in late August and just hit a whole bunch of home runs and, kill it. Shane Spencer, anybody remember Shane Spencer? Mike Jacobs, a Met prospect that came up and just killed it at the end of 2005. Never to be seen or heard from again. So let's slow down on Rhys Hoskins. And it's not the Philly hate. I'm just being honest. And but what? Because they signed Arrieta, all of a sudden the Phillies are a wild card contending team. They lost 90 something games last year. So I'm not ready to go there with the Phillies. I think they'll be improved. I think they'll be better. I can see them winning 75 to 77 games or something right about that. But I'm not ready to sit there and say that the Phillies are this team that is going to just, that's going to just take off and be this year's version of the Twins. They can be, absolutely. But I just don't see it just yet. The Braves, I'm still waiting on this amazing pitching staff that they were supposed to be getting through prospects to come up and show it because I haven't seen it. Foltynewicz hasn't been what they've expected. You know, the Fires kid or the Freeze kid, whatever his name is, I haven't been impressed. You know, the other cat that they got from the Angels, he had some moments, but I haven't really been impressed with him. So I'm still waiting on the Braves, you know, magical pitching to come up and dominate. From the position side of things, I mean, I think they're going to be better. They're going to score runs. They're going to do what they do. It's a big year for Dansby Swanson. Okuna, I know they sent him down, but he'll be back in mid-April and probably win Rookie of the Year. But I mean, I think the NL East is the NL East. I think the Mets and the Nationals the NL East. Mets as a wild card, Nationals as a division winner. I think that, I think the Central is the Cubs, but I think the Cubs, the gap between the Cubs and everybody else has closed a little bit. Because I think I love what the Brewers did. I think they had a great offseason. I would have loved them to cap it by adding a starting pitcher. They didn't. We'll see if they were able to get one at the deadline. But, you know, I think the Brewers had a really good offseason. And I don't love what the Cubs did this offseason. You know, Yu Darvish, really? I mean, to me, they chose Yu Darvish over Jake Arrieta. I would have taken Jake Arrieta if you ask me. I'm not a Yu Darvish guy. I mean, did they watch the World Series? Did the Cubs watch the World Series? Did Theo watch the World Series at all? Clearly he didn't, because he gave Yu Darvish $100 million, and I never in my life would have did that. But whatever. And I love Theo, but Theo and his free agent decisions are questionable, especially in pitchers. Matt Clement, anyone? So I don't love what they still don't have a bullpen. Their bullpen has arguably gotten worse. So I don't love their bullpen there. I don't know. I don't think the Cubs are a slam dunk as everybody else is making them out to be. So we got to see there. I don't love what the Cardinals did. I know they got Ozuna and they made a couple other moves, but there's just something missing with the Cardinals. I don't know what to put my hand. I don't know if I can put my finger on it. It's just something missing with that team that just, I don't know what it is. I don't know. I think Ozuna will help them, but I don't know. I think the Brewers are better. I have the Brewers actually. I don't know yet. I'll come back to that. But I think the Brewers and the Cubs will battle for that division all year. I really do. In the West, I think the Dodgers will take a step back. I don't think they'll be as good as they were last year. Now, obviously, they won 104 games last year, and they had a stretch late in the season where they were 91-36. So a step back from that is what exactly? I don't think a step back isn't exactly 77 and 80 and 84. I think a step back is 94, 95, 96 wins. I think the division's better. But I still think the Dodgers are the team to beat in that division. I don't love their pitching staff. I'm not crazy about their pitching staff. But push comes to shove, they still have Kershaw. They still have Jansen. I think the Dodgers will win that division. I think the Diamondbacks are going to have a step back. I wasn't impressed with the Diamondbacks last year. I thought they did that a lot with smoke and mirrors. I wasn't really too sold on the Diamondbacks last year, and I think they've gotten worse. I think they should have kept Martinez. I know they tried to. They couldn't work out the particulars of a deal, but I'm not sold on the Diamondbacks. I think I love what the Rockies did, going out there and getting Wade Davis, improving that bullpen. I think the Rockies are going to try to do it with a dominant bullpen, because I don't think you could ever trust the starting. I know that starting rotation kind of exceeded expectations last year, especially with all the young guys, but I'm not ready to believe that the Rockies are this great pitching team. So I think they're going to do it they're going to at least try to do it on paper with a dominant bullpen, and their offense is always going to be their offense. I mean, they're always going to bludgeon teams to death. So I think the Rockies are going to be a good team. I think the Diamondbacks can take a step back. And to me, the biggest boom or bust candidate, I'll say boom right now. I'll say the Giants are going to be better. Look, the last year was an aberration. The Giants were not that bad. I mean, the Giants were historically bad last year. That team, that manager, that culture there, they're better than that. Everybody knows it. I think the Giants will be competitive again this year. I think they'll win 85 to 87 games, compete for a wild card spot. I think they'll be right in the mix. I know the Bumgarner injury hurts them. 6 weeks he's out to start the year. That's not exactly great karma or a great, message to start off the season with, but I think they'll be okay. I really do. I think after everything went wrong last year, I mean, you got to believe that there's going to be some kind of market correction there. So I think the Giants are going to be better. I can't pick a wild card right now. I guess if I have to, I'm going to go with my Mets. Of course I'm going to go with my Mets, and I'll break down my Mets and my thoughts on the team, with Dan, but I'm going to go with the Mets, and I'm going with the Dodgers winning the division. I'm going to go with the Mets winning the first wild card, and I'm going to go with, you know what? No, I'm going to go on a limb. I'm going to say the Mets win the division, and the Nationals are the wild card, and I think the Giants are the second wild card. I think so. The wild card race is going to come down to 2 spots, 4 teams competing for that spot. The Nationals, the Giants, the Rockies, and the Brewers. And I think the Nationals will get 1 spot, and I think the Giants will get the other. That's my prediction. As far as the AL, I'll breeze through these a little bit quicker, but the AL, I'm not sold on the Yankees. To me, and I know that the first thing you guys are going to say is, oh, I'm a hater and this, that, and the other. And of course I hate the Yankees, but this notion, this belief that we might as well just not even play American League Baseball this year and just hand the title over to the Yankees. It's complete tomfoolery. First of all, did the Yankees win a World Series last year? I seem to misremember. I thought the Astros won the World Series because if you listen to everybody talk, the Yankees won the World Series last year. They didn't. And I know they added Stanton, and I'm not even going to rant about that again. I ranted about that enough. But I know they added Stanton. And first of all, the one thing you have to understand about the Yankees, everything broke right for the Yankees last year. Everything that was everything broke right for the Yankees. I think and I know the Yankee fan like the back of my hand. I have family members that are Yankee fans. My entire family is Yankee fans. So I know the Yankee fan mentality like the best of them. Even the biggest Yankee fan last year did not expect Aaron Judge to be Aaron Judge. And if he did, he's a liar. They're bold-faced lying. They didn't expect Aaron Judge to do what he did. Aaron Judge was a guy that was in danger of not even making the roster. And he went from being a 4th outfielder to an MVP. Luis Severino was a guy that was an enigma in 2016 to a Cy Young candidate in 2017. Everything broke right. They made magic. They made tremendous trades. Everything that was everything broke. They even got a contribution out of Ellsbury before he got hurt again. No surprise. Like everything, they had a resurgence from Brett Gardner. Like CC Sabathia found the fountain of youth. Everything that was everything went right for that team. And you guys know the theory that 1 year with everything that was everything that could go right goes right. Usually the next year, there's a little bit of a market correction. Usually things kind of come back to normal. Now, I'm not saying that Judge is going to be a 4th outfielder this year. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying necessarily that Severino is going to turn out to be a bum again this year. I'm not saying that necessarily, but I'm saying that we can't. Didi Gregorius. Now, Didi has been good for the Yankees, but Didi became an MVP candidate for the Yankees last year. I don't think he's, that went above and beyond anybody's expectations. So, again, slow down the hype on the Yankees. I still don't love their pitching staff. Like, CeCe's old. I know he had a resurgence, but he's old. Tanaka, everybody forgets because he had that dominant, that truly amazing postseason. And I think he was doing that more for money than I think he was for his actual. I think he was just trying to perform well to cash in, and then he ended up just staying, opting into his deal. But, everybody forgets that this was a guy that was terrible in the regular season. Awful. So what Tanaka are we getting? Are we getting the good Tanaka? Are we getting postseason Tanaka? Or are we getting regular season Tanaka? That's a question mark. Sonny Gray. He was a disappointment last year. He was a guy that did not meet expectations. So, I got to see more from Sonny Gray before I'm all gung-ho. And Severino, look, again, the guy had a tremendous year, really stepped up, really came into his own. Can he do it again? I think there's a real question mark about that. Can he do it again? We don't know. He's had 1 full year. Do we know for sure that he can do it again? I don't know that. He threw a lot of innings and he wasn't great in the postseason. That's another thing. He was not great in the postseason. He had that one game against the Indians, and the Yankees gave him a 5-run lead. So, he really had to do much, but, he was not great against the Indians. He wasn't great against the Astros. So he didn't have a great postseason. So, I think there's a question mark on Severino. He threw a lot of innings. That bullpen has got to be, we'll see how that bullpen recovers from all the innings that they threw in the postseason. So I don't think the Yankees are this lock that everybody thinks. Look, we know that they're going to bludgeon teams to death. We know that their offense is going to, they're going to score runs. I'm not worried about that. And I think the Yankees will be a good team. But this idea that we should just basically hand a division over to the Yankees, it's a fallacy. I really believe that. Plus, I think the Red Sox, I like the JD Martinez move. I think he's going to rake in Boston. If Price is healthy, the Red Sox have a better rotation than the Yankees. I don't even think it's debatable. I don't think it's arguable. I just don't. The Yankees have, the Red Sox have Chris Sale and David Price, and the Yankees have Tanaka and Severino. Who are you taking? And I know Price has been a disaster in the postseason, but realistically, let's use common sense. And I think I think people are not counting on the Orioles, and I think they're sleeping on them. And I still think the Orioles have a potential to be a very good team. You know, it was just 2 years ago they were in the wild card game. They were a good team in that division. You know, they've been a pretty good team for the most part these last few years. Buck Showalter is right now the best manager in the division. I don't even think it's arguable. I think Cora will do a good job, but you know, he's still a rookie. The jury's still out on Boone. So Buck easily is the best manager in the division right now. So, I think people are discounting the Orioles, and I think that's a mistake. So I got the Red Sox winning the division, and I think this is an easy one. The American League's easy. I got both the Yankees and the Orioles winning the wild cards. So I don't even think I don't have to pause for drama as far as who I'm going to pick for my wild card. I think it's going to be the Yankees and the Orioles. I think you're going to have 3 teams come out of the American League East. In the Central, I think it's the Indians. I mean, even though I think the Indians have taken a step back from their 102 win team last year, I think the Indians are still good. I think they still have a very good pitching staff. They had some departures in the bullpen, but I think, Francona, I think he's the best at figuring out how to use his guys. I think the Indians are a good team. I think there's some pressure on the Indians. I will say that. I think they're similar to the Nationals in the sense that it's now or never for them too. They're not like all these other teams. Their window is very limited. We know that they're a small market team. Andrew Miller and Cody Allen are free agents after the year. It's almost do or die time for them too now. It's now or never for them. It's time for them to make some moves and do some big things. So I think the Indians have to make some moves, and there's a lot of pressure on Corey Kluber. All I have to say about Corey Kluber, and I said it last year when he lost in the postseason, the last 3 games, big time games that his team has played, Corey Kluber has been a disaster. No need to debate it. No need to argue it. World Series Game 7, he was not great. Game 2 of the ALDS, he was not great. Got rocked. And Game 5, he was not great. Game 5 of the ALDS against the Yankees, he was not great. So there's some pressure on Corey Kluber to kind of silence some critics, at least critics here and on this show, about Corey Kluber. AL West, Astros. I don't even think there's even much of a debate. Honestly, I don't think there's much of a debate. So Astros in the AL West. There's no need to even break it down. The Astros are the best. I think the Astros are the best team in the American League. So there it is. No need to even get into it. So I got, as far as who comes out of the American League, I've got the Astros repeating as American League champions. I think they beat the Red Sox in the ALCS, and I've got my Mets. Of course, come on. Of course I'm going to pick my Mets. I've got my Mets defeating. Who I got my Mets defeating? I got my Mets defeating the Dodgers in the NLCS and advancing to the World Series, where they will play the Astros, and they will win the World Series. I know you guys are going to kill me because, you're going to pick the Mets, blah, blah, blah. You're going to be disappointed. I got to pick my team. It's like picking Duke in the Final Four. Of course I'm going to pick my squad. I'm not going to sit there and give you the Nationals in the World Series. Of course not. I'm going to give you the Mets. That's what I'm going to do. Of course, I'm a Met fan. You know what I mean? But, so I'm going to pick the Mets. So that's what it is, man. That is what it is. Picks for MVP and Cy Young. I've got in the American League for MVP, I think Stanton and Judge. Even if you think Judge is going to have a monster year, I think they'll split the vote somewhat. Unless Stanton just has a truly just horrible first year in New York, which I can see. I think they'll split the vote. The American League MVP, obviously it starts with Trout. Altuve is going to have something to say about it, of course. I'm going to go with American League MVP. I am going to go with Mookie Betts. I think Betts is going to have an MVP bounce back year. You can make the case he probably should have won it 2 years ago. I think the addition of JD Martinez only helps that this year. He has that big bat presence to protect him in the lineup. I think Mookie's going to win the MVP this year for the Red Sox. Cy Young. Cy Young. I'm going to go with a surprise pick. I'm going to go with James Paxton of the Mariners. I figured I'd go with a surprise pick, an off-the-wall pick. I don't know. I just think the guy in a lot of ways, he reminds me of the Mets Steven Matz. A lefty, but he's always had some injury concerns. I think this is the year he finally kind of puts it all together, finally stays healthy, finally has a big year for the Mariners. I don't think it helps the Mariners because I think the Mariners are just going to be a disappointment again. I think the Mariners are going to have to tear that team down. I think they missed their shot. I think they missed their boat, and that team is going to get old pretty quickly. So I think they're going to have to tear it down eventually. And I think this is the year where I think they start. I can see the Mariners hovering around 500, but I think they're not going to make it. That's my one breakdown of that division. I think it's the Astros and then everybody else. But I'm going to go with Paxton as my Cy Young pick. In the NL, I got Noah. Yeah, let's go with the homer picks. I got my man Noah Thor winning the Cy Young. He's healthy. He's ready. I think he's going to have a little chip on his shoulder after he kind of got humbled a little bit last year with the whole MRI thing and then pulling the lat, basically missing his entire season. I think Noah's going to come out guns blazing this year to win a Cy Young. And then as far as MVP in the NL, I'm going to go with Anthony Rizzo of the Cubs for MVP. Yeah, that's going to be my pick. Anthony Rizzo. So that is my prediction. I will officially write this down on paper, put it online, make you guys screenshot it, record it, hold me to it all year. These are going to be my picks. And I reserve the right to change my mind on these picks. So before tomorrow morning, before I post these, I reserve my right to change my mind. But these will be my picks and I'll post them tomorrow. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break and I'll be back with Dan Labriola of the Duke Nation podcast as my guest this week. He's going to come talk to us about the Duke loss and the future of the program and how this season will be remembered. And of course, we're going to get into some Mets baseball. So stay tuned. We'll be back after a break. You are listening to the Technical Foul Podcast, the realest sports podcast in all of the world. Listen and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and all other podcasting services. Follow us on social media, on Facebook at The Technical Foul Podcast, where you can become an official member of our TFP Nation. On Instagram at The TF Podcast, and on Twitter at The TF Podcast 1. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Yo, welcome back to the podcast. And our guest today is a very special guest. He is the host of the Duke Nation podcast. You guys know I had to have this guy on the show eventually, right? So I figured what better time, what better way than to get him on a show after a heartbreaking and horrific Duke loss so we can both vent together. Mr. Dan Labriola, of course, he is the host of the Duke Nation podcast and he is also a Met fan, very excited about the upcoming season. So we will get into that with him as well. Dan, this is Manny. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, Manny. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. Glad to have you on. We exchanged some DMs this week, and told this gentleman that I am a fan of his show, and he's a fellow, and he's a fellow Duke fan and a Mets fan. So we have a lot of things in common. So they say great people travel in packs. So I guess we're great people then.
Hey, I'll take it, man. No doubt.
Cool. So before we get into what we're going to get into, if you just want to introduce yourself to the audience who hasn't had a chance to listen to you before, just kind of give a quick bio about yourself and how you got into podcasting and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, my name's Dan Labriola. I host the Duke Nation podcast for thedukenation.com with my co-host Ryan Lohman, who we listen to some Duke podcasts, and he suggested that we come out and make our own sort of, by the fans, for the fans, and things kind of just took off. And, we were lucky enough to early on get John Rothstein to come on to our show and talk about it was the 2016-2017 team and when they were having all their injuries, and then since then we've been lucky enough to have some other guests, some former players, some former Duke football players, some NFL guys, and it's just been a lot of fun. But more about myself, I'm a junior at George Mason. I study economics, and like you said, I'm an avid sports fan. I love my Blue Devils. I love my Mets, and I'm just ready for opening day tomorrow. And I guess for next season for Duke, since things didn't really work out as planned.
Yeah, we'll get into it. We'll definitely get into it. Cool. Well, we'll excuse the fact that you're a Devils fan. We won't get into that. You know, this is a Rangers household, but.
Okay. All right. Well, you see, we haven't been to the playoffs since 2012. So
yeah, it's been a while.
Things are, the Rangers are in a good situation with their rebuild. They're always going to be the top of the market for free agents, and it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, I guess it was time. I don't know how I feel about it just yet. I think we could have gotten at least one more run out of that core group. But unfortunately, you know how it is. Sometimes it's better to pull the plug early than to pull the plug when it's too late. So I understand. I could see both sides of the argument. I know some fans that were not happy with the returns, or at least felt that we could have got more, at least for Ryan McDonough and some guys. But it is what it is.
It's about the picks. It's about the
picks.
Absolutely.
And like I haven't had a chance too much to talk about this season on the podcast anyway. But I think with trades like these, and when you do a rebuild, I mean, it's hard to grade it in the moment. It's hard to grade it right now, or even next year.
It's impossible.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Impossible.
Exactly. It's something that you have to grade, at the very least 3, 4, 5 years down the line before you can.
Definitely. I mean, if you just you can look at any trade. The first thing that came to mind when you're talking about, maybe it being an early rebuild was, I know since you're a Mets fan, correct?
Yes.
So we're both Mets fans, and the Phillies hung on a bit too late to their core of Rollins, Utley, and Howard, and then still you look back a couple of years, and they still had Ryan Howard and his huge contract, and it really set them back. So you never know how that stuff's going to work out. At the time, they were great contracts, or they made trades and whatnot, but it could be the right thing, but you figure it out a few years later.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I completely agree. Well, enough about hockey, because we're going to bore some of my listeners who are anti-hockey. We're going to bore them to death. Unfortunately. But let's get into our Blue Devils. Obviously, we share a common interest. We're both diehard Duke fans. Very disappointing loss on Sunday on a variety of levels, losing to Kansas 85-81. Very simply, Daniel, what happened?
Well, I thought Duke played. Actually, I really thought they played terrific in the second half. Everything kind of was working out. Other than Grayson, who for the second straight game was really struggling to get his shot and really hadn't attempted much until towards late in the game when he was getting fouled and making his free throws. But Trey Duval played probably one of the best games he's played as a Blue Devil.
I think it's his best game, really.
Absolutely. He was doing absolutely everything. He was getting to the basket at will, making great plays, playing good defense. Carter was obviously in foul trouble. Marvin Bagley was, he was Marvin Bagley. There's nothing else you really need to say. And Trent wasn't doing all that well, but at the end of the day, they put themselves in the position to win. A couple things, obviously, that will stick out, but it's at the time Duke was up by 3 with about 50 seconds left, and they get the ball in the post to Wendell Carter Jr.
Absolutely.
And, I've said it many times, but give me any day of the week Wendell Carter Jr. in the post and have him make a post move, and he did. And honestly, at the time, he just choked the ball a bit too hard, came up short, and then another key play down the other way. Duke's back in their 2-3 zone. They got back well in transition, but it's easy for me to say now, but for some reason, Trey Duval goes for the steal when leaving Svi Mykhailiuk open, and when he went for the steal, the thing was Devontae Graham was already being guarded by I believe it was Grayson. I'm not 100% sure on that, but
I think it was. I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, because either way, Duval comes over for the steal, doesn't get it. Graham's able to get off a pass, and Mykhailiuk, who had missed a couple threes, but recently when he was wide open, but not a guy you can leave open. He knocked down the three, and then of course the agony and the torture at the end there when Grayson puts up an extremely difficult shot that looked like it was in. Looked like it was in a couple times, and that was the end of regulation. But I guess to really answer your question, towards the end of the game, the thing that I didn't really completely understand was they got away from Marvin Bagley a bit too much for me. He's a potential generational talent. He's arguably, probably for a 1-year scenario, one of the best, if not the best, Blue Devil to put on the blue and white. And frankly, they got away from him. And I understand wanting to go to Grayson or whatever, but I think they got away from him too much. I personally think you can give it to him in the post and let him make a play, but at the end of the day, those things happen. And obviously, the block charge with Wendell Carter, which personally, obviously, through I try to say unbiased eyes, but of course I'm a Duke fan, so there is always going to be a bit of bias there. It looked like a charge to me, but at the end of the day, Duke had every opportunity to win the game and frankly just came up short.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with everything you said. I know I just being online, being on Twitter, talking to fellow Duke fans, I know they tended to make a lot out of the charge. And I think we can all, every basketball fan in America, even the Duke haters out there who take pride and joy in hating on Duke, and we understand it, we get it. But even they had to admit that was clear as day a charge. Anybody with a second grade understanding of basketball understood that was a charge. That being said, I don't think that changed the game. I honestly, I thought the biggest play of the game really was the Wendell Carter missed shot. That right there, you put that game away. Everything that happens after that game, everything that happens after that possession is null and void if you make that shot. At the very least, make the shot, get fouled, something. And you got one of your best post players in the post, deep in the post, and that's a shot that Wendell 9 times out of 10 makes. And he didn't make it this time. Yeah, he made it all season. Exactly. He made it all season, or at the very least goes to the line and draws a foul. You know what I mean? So, so I thought that was really, really costly there because it was a 3-point game. I think it was like 30-something seconds left, I believe, at the time. Yeah. And he makes that shot. It's a 5-point game. Who knows? Maybe he makes it in an and one, hits the free throw. It's a 6-point. It just completely changes the game. It kept Kansas in it. I do believe I will disagree with one thing. I don't think they played as well in the second half as they did in the first half. I thought for the most part, they controlled the game in the first half. I thought in the second half, the defense really let them down. And I don't know about you, but I was always worried about the zone. I always felt like sooner or later that zone defense would come back to bite us. And I think in the second half, it came back to bite us. Especially when Kansas made adjustments, when they were able to put a guy in there in the center that could pass out. Duke just, I don't know what it was. They just could not defend that corner three, that corner spot three. You know what I'm talking about. They just got eaten up alive in the second half, whether it was Newman, whether it was, Vic, two guys that just completely killed Duke in the second half. What's your thoughts on the zone? And did you see it the way that I did?
I personally, after having watched a bunch of film on their man-to-man defense, I honestly didn't have any real issues with their zone because watching the issues that they had, like I said, with the man-to-man, and with a comparison to the way they played zone, I thought it was leaps and bounds better, and it gave them more chances to win games, honestly. And evidently, Coach K and staff felt the same way since they stuck with it, even earlier in the season in games like against Boston College and stuff like that, where the man-to-man defense really cost them. And for most part, for a lot of really for that entire game, cost them the game. But the second half, their zone was definitely not as crisp as it had been in the past. But a lot of it, I saw somewhere on Twitter, they changed the type of zone they were playing a ton.
Yeah, they did.
Whether it was a 1-3-1 or they went 3-2 and then they went 2-3, and it almost, I don't know if it got them out of their comfort zone, but either way, Kansas was able to get into the middle. And that's the thing with Duke's zone. It was almost as if they had the philosophy that, hey, you can take the easy twos. We'll give you the 2-on-1 down low. Mm-hmm. Really, you get into the middle of the zone, and they'll have Carter playing almost safety right there.
Right.
And say, you can go ahead 2-on-1. Once you're not hitting threes, we're fine. But when they started switching up, the corner threes were open, and I do agree that their zone wasn't as good in the second half, but it still gave them the opportunity and the chance to win the game, like we talked about, and really came down to 2 possessions at the end of regulation. In 3, if you want to include Grayson's last second attempt, but I never had a problem with them playing zone, only because their issues with help side defense and guarding the dribble drive were so they were just really in the beginning of the season atrocious to the point where when you commit to the zone, you can't go back, especially that late in the season.
Right, I understand. I mean, speaking on the zone and the man-to-man defense, I mean, why do you think they were so bad defensively in man-to-man? I mean, you look at the athletes that they have there, and I know that playing defense isn't all about athleticism. Obviously, I get that, but you would think that a team with Wendell Carter, with Marvin Bagley, with Gary Trent, Grayson, guys that are athletic. I mean, these are not you and me out there. I mean, these are legitimate athletes out there. I mean, why do you think they struggled so? I mean, they were horrific. They were horrific man-to-man defense.
It's an interesting question. It's an interesting thing to bring up, and it's really something that really you can trace it back to. I guess I don't know what year that was when Duke had Austin Rivers. They had that trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's sort of. When they had the next season when they went to the Elite Eight and wound up losing to Louisville, that team was good defensively. But even if you go to the championship team in 2015, for the longest time they were having difficulties on defense.
Yeah, I agree. I remember that.
Man to man, they were able to show zone, but then they went back to man, and really when it came to the tournament, they kind of buckled down and kind of cracked their knuckles and said, hey, we're going to play man-to-man defense. Sometimes we're going to play zone, but our bread and butter is going to be our man-to-man. But so I guess I'm saying, Duke's had that issue, especially in the one-and-done era, whereas this team specifically, I think it was really a lack of communication, which was really it was interesting to see because when they were in the zone, that's when they communicated their best. Right. They realized they needed one another, and you had Grayson right there at the top, and he would be yelling, screener here or rotate here and all that stuff. But for whatever reason it was, they weren't communicating in that fashion in the man-to-man. And I do think it wound up coming back to hurt them because it's so much easier to guard a 3-point shot when you're in man-to-man defense. It's easier to guard plays in the post, and it's easier, and you don't have those 2-on-1 situations like I just talked about. But a lot of it, I also think, and this is, I'm sure many people they either will agree or won't agree, but it is extremely difficult to get one and done prospects like Duke always has, and at this point, and especially coming in next season as well, to buy into a defensive scheme. People always talk about, they say Coach K was, for such a tremendous defensive coach in, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, even up to 2010. It's really baffling that his teams can be so bad at defense. But if you look at those teams who had, you can take, let's just look at their championship teams. 91, you had Bobby Hurley, who was a sophomore, so it wasn't his first year. You had, Christian Laettner, who was a junior, and you had Grant Hill, who was a freshman, but came into a culture where,
right.
you play defense or you didn't play at all. And, then the next season, you have, Christian Leitner as a senior and Bobby's a junior, Grant's a sophomore, and you have all those guys and they kind of, laid the foundations. They were there. They were able to improve. Now, I don't think any of those guys were good, really elite defenders when they were freshmen, because there's that adjustment period when you're that young. You can even look at, 2001. The leader on the team is Shane Battier. Shane Battier is a senior. 2010, you have the three seniors. Mm-hmm. 2015 is really the difference. It's the one outlier when you have one guy, Quinn Cook, who through his career wasn't a great defender. He wasn't great at guarding the dribble drive, but he had some help, and I think that's what people will say, and people will forget that it takes time to develop into being a good college basketball player. But for the most part, what takes the most time to develop is buying into a defensive scheme and realizing that, hey, to be successful as a team, not just individually, you have to play this sort of defense. You have to communicate in this sort of way, and you learn different things that you don't necessarily learn in only 1 year. And it's not whether or not guys bought into it or not. I do think that this year's team did buy into the philosophy and Coach K's defense, and then eventually buying into playing zone. It's just a matter of not everyone is a great defender. Some guys it takes longer to learn. I think if you had freshman Grayson out there, freshman Grayson was not a good defender at all.
No, not at all.
But over his career, he bought into the system, was able to play all different types, and you look at now and just recently, like I said, he was the top guy on defense for them at the top of their zone. So it's definitely interesting because they all have definitely the athletic ability to do so, to play that airtight defense. But they're 18, 19 years old. It's not necessarily easy to go out there day in and day out and be able to guard 21, 22-year-olds.
Yeah, I understand. I think the thing that was more puzzling for me, though, and you brought up some excellent points about the past championship teams. I compare this team a lot to the 2015 team. I mean, I think it's probably the most fair to compare it to that team as opposed to compare it to the 2010 team and obviously the 01 and 92, 91, 92. Even in the 2015, you brought up that team did struggle defensively a lot throughout the course of that season. But I think it all changed once Suleiman was kicked off the team. They inserted Matt Jones into the starting lineup, and then remember they put Justice at the 4, and I think that's what really had changed for that team. And one of the highlights of that year was Emil Jefferson and the job he did against Kaminsky in the championship game. I mean, he just basically locked them down completely. So I thought that, you brought up a great example. I mean, that 2015 team wasn't prototypically the greatest defensive Duke team, but they adjusted and they made the adjustments and they became that team. I think the disappointing team, I think that's the disappointing aspect of this year's team is that, they just never seemed like they just ever got it with the man-to-man concept. It just was really bad. I mean, it was terrible to watch. So I guess that was the one thing that stuck out to me is just why. And to take it back to our prior conversation, it's not that I felt that the zone particularly was going to cost them, but I kind of had the same thought process that Kenny Smith had throughout the tournament, that he felt that in order for Duke to win a championship, there was going to come a stretch for 3 to 5 minutes. They were going to have to lock down and bear down and guard somebody man to man, because eventually somebody was going to adjust to that zone. He didn't know when, he didn't know who, but somebody was going to be able to master that zone. And I agreed with it. Like I kind of agreed with it. And, we talked about how Duke was able to shuffle their defenses late, especially the types of zones. But I almost wanted them to shuffle between zone and man. I think they tried to get a little too cute with trying to disguise the different zones, and I think it cost them. I really do.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. But the one thing I did definitely want to bring up, and going back to the 2015 team, and obviously, you compare this team to that team, and it's very, very common. It's what teams do. They compare their current team with whatever team, that has championship aspirations, like Duke does, or Duke did in this case. But, you compare them to the previous teams that won, who could fit in this role and this role. The one thing is that I thought, like you said, the switch of putting Matt Jones in the starting lineup and move to have, obviously they knew their bread and butter was give the ball to Jaleel in the post and let him go to work. And the thing with Jaleel is he was obviously a tremendous passer.
Right,
so
yeah.
By putting Matt Jones in that starting lineup, and this really helped them against Gonzaga because Matt Jones had his huge game, 4 for 4, I believe it was, from 3. In that game, he was tremendous, but you can give the ball in the post, and no matter who Jaleel kicked it out to, if they doubled him, someone was ready to shoot and ready to knock down a 3. And I thought that was just obviously a tremendous adjustment made by Coach K, along with going zone. But from the defensive perspective, Duke had two bulldogs on defense, Justice Winslow, and I think just from the bulldog mentality, they had Tyus Jones.
Right.
It was just, Justice could guard anyone he wanted. It didn't matter if it were Kaminsky, if it were a point guard, it didn't matter. He was guarding them. And I think what Duke fans really need to realize is that those guys are, obviously we knew at the time they were special, but to have guys like that who from day one in the summer came in and all they wanted to do was win a national championship, that's not common. That's not, right. People get angry when they say that, college is the stepping stone to the NBA. But that's exactly what it is. And I don't think that can really be, I don't think anyone can say otherwise, because so long as you have a one-and-done rule, there are going to be those kids who should be in the NBA who are using it as the stepping stone. But right. These kids, while they did use it in Tyus and Justice and Jaleel, they used it as a stepping stone to the NBA. While they were at Duke, they bought in completely, and they poured their hearts out because they wanted to win a national championship, and they did. And I think that was really just a big difference. And, you had guys on this Duke team, obviously, that wanted to win. And you saw that when Wendell Carter fouled out and he was off the court crying. And I think there was someone wrote something on The Athletic afterwards about Trey Duval going to him and kept nudging him, saying, hey, we got this, don't worry. And they obviously wanted to win, but, there were times throughout the season when it didn't look it, or, there were some reports that came out that maybe some people weren't as fully engaged as others, and I think that's just the reality of the situation, and I think that's the reason when you look at the 2015 team that it's definitely something that you have to, it should be, honestly, I think it's the first thing that should come to mind is that those kids, all they wanted to do was win, and that's what they did.
I agree completely. So just to kind of recap, do you look at this season as a disappointment? Because I know that's another kind of debate that's been had among the Duke fandom community, whatever you want to call it. How do you look back on this season? I know some people tend to look at it as, they got to an Elite Eight. If we're being fair, they were basically an eyelash away from being in a Final Four. You look back at this, this season and it's a success, blah, blah, blah. Or you're more like me. I wouldn't say cynical, but just feel kind of disappointed in that, this kind of was a championship or bust type of year. Where do you stand on this season? Like, how will you look back on this season? I know it's still recent. The game was on Sunday, so it's kind of hard to say look back, but do you view this season as a disappointment?
I think it's definitely an interesting thing to bring up because, and I'm gonna segue into another thing that I actually was thinking about before before we called and before we started doing this. I do personally view it as a disappointment. You have the best player in college basketball in Marvin Bagley. You have Wendell Carter Jr., who was arguably the second or third best big man. Obviously, DeAndre Ayton is up there as one or two, so he's right there behind him.
Right.
You have Grayson Allen, who was, I believe, an honorable mention for an All-American. You have Gary Trent Jr. You had Trey Duval, who was the number one point guard coming out of high school. And coming off the bench, there were big expectations for Javin. Marquise Bolden was, personally, he was phenomenal this year.
Yeah, absolutely. He impressed me.
Yep. Beyond all extent that he stays for next season, because he would be, I think, the perfect five for that team.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
To answer your question, absolutely.
Even O'Connell in the limited, he was the one guy that I was disappointed in. And Coach K didn't, and obviously Coach K knows more about his team than we'll ever know, obviously. But of course, right? Yeah. But even O'Connell, I was disappointed that the little bit of time that he did get in these games, he always made a play, and I love that about him. Like, he always contributed positive minutes. It was never. And Javin, as the season went on, got better and became a big contributor. So I agree. All three guys are three main reserves, not counting Jack White. And even Jack at times had great moments. I thought that this team was deeper than I think the perception was.
I definitely do agree. And the way that Duke would play their bench guys, really, it would be, you could have Marquise come in for Wendell, and then you could have Wendell come in for Marvin, and so that way they would kind of stagger it that way, which makes sense to me because we all knew this when Duke recruited Antonio Vrankovic, and it's absolutely nothing against him, but he knew when he was a 3-star, 4-star recruit, he wasn't gonna get big minutes. He wasn't really gonna play all that much at Duke, and I think it was a bit unfair when Duke got him to immediately compare him to Brian Zubek, because frankly, he's to put it loosely, he was a 7-foot white guy, and that's the first thing everyone thinks of. They're like, hey, he could be Brian Zubek come his senior year, and this year, junior year, I think it would be unfair not to put him into a situation that he wasn't ready for, and. Clearly, whenever I give my opinion and people, at different times will come at you and say this and this and whatever and say, you don't believe in Coach K, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. Obviously, we each have different opinions on what we should be doing. Early in the season, I was screaming for them to play consistently zone. And then, of course, you always get people saying, hey, Coach K knows what he's doing. They need to play man, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. We each have our different opinions. It doesn't mean that I'm saying, I should be the next head coach of Duke men's basketball once Coach K retires. It just means that, I watch the game in a certain way and see certain things. And and those are my opinions. But getting back to your question, the season, it absolutely is a disappointment. It's a great achievement to get to the Elite Eight. No one's questioning that. I don't think anyone would refute that. But when you have arguably the most talented roster that Duke basketball's really ever seen, and I'll be completely honest, I seriously do believe that starting five would rival any starting five that Duke has ever put out there.
I agree with you.
Look, I love obviously watching the highlights of Christian Laettner. That's awesome, but if you put Christian Laettner up against Marvin Bagley, I'm picking Marvin Bagley every day.
Absolutely.
Bobby Hurley was a tremendous defender, but when Trey Duval was on his game, no one in America could guard him. It was Gary Trent Jr. is an elite shooter. All those things were there. Duke had every piece to win the national title, and frankly, they weren't able to defend enough, and they came a couple plays short of getting to the Final Four and still playing. But with that said, this was what I was alluding to earlier. Obviously, Duke's recruiting class going into next season, is nothing short of phenomenal, spectacular. It's unbelievable. I was in Durham when Zion Williamson announced he was coming to Duke, and the place was going nuts.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I love the guys already. You love being able to have R.J. Barrett, Cam Reddish, Trey Jones, Zion Williamson, potentially B.J. Montgomery if he chooses to come to Duke. But at the end of the day, it's unfair for Duke fans to proclaim national championship or bust simply because of the recruiting class. And you watch all these highlights. I can watch Zion dunk all day. You can watch what R.J. Barrett just did in the McDonald's All-American game because he was absolutely phenomenal.
Best player on the court.
It wasn't even close.
Right.
It was phenomenal. And you can Trey Jones, whatever, but when these guys all get on the court together, the only thing that matters to me is how they play defense.
Absolutely.
If they can't play defense, we've seen what can happen. We see that, they won't be able to succeed. So I do think it's unfair to, before a season starts, say national championship or bust. So I guess my little PSA here for Duke fans and for everyone saying, because it's so easy to look at the rankings and say, on 247 Sports, Duke has 4 of the top 10 guys coming in. Really, they have 3 small forwards, but I'll include Zion as being a power forward because he's got a perfect build to be a college forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have potentially Marquise Bolden at the 5, Trey Jones at the 1, and fill everyone else in there. And it's tough to say how can this team not be successful, but really everything we've seen about these kids is that they're elite offensive players. But if you go online, you try to find videos of them playing defense. I mean, if you can find them, give me a call because before I write articles and do podcasts, I try to do as much research on these kids as I can. And frankly, it's extremely difficult to find defensive highlights because when you're making a mixtape of a guy, no one's gonna say, "Oh, look at the way he edges off that, off the pick and roll, and look at how he defends the pick and roll or stays in front of his man." That's not what people want to watch. They want to watch Zion put the ball between his legs and finish at the rim in the middle of a game, and that's understandable. But I think it would be unfair to say national championship or bust until they get on the court. We can see what they can do defensively. But just to reiterate, absolutely, this season was a disappointment. This was a national championship caliber team that really came up a couple plays short of the Final Four.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't disagree with anything you said. I think for me, I say national championship or bust. Only in the term that this was a national championship caliber team. I mean, absolutely. I don't think anybody can watch that team and say this team doesn't have an opportunity or shouldn't at the very least. I think had they gotten to a Final Four and lost, I think the majority of Duke fans, would say, okay, you know what? We got to the final dance and it just, you lose a close game to Villanova. I don't think anybody's really complaining. I do think the loss in the Elite Eight, because I also I think what contributes to this is I think we're better than Kansas. I think Duke was the more talented team. I just think that Kansas made it.
Without a doubt.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt, they were better.
Right. And that's the way in sports. I mean, in sports, you play these games long enough, the most talented team is not always going to win, and that's the charm of the NCAA tournament. I mean, you could be the greatest team ever, and for one game you run across a hot team and you're going to lose. I mean, it's just the way the ball bounces. If you ask me, I compare this team a lot to the '99 Duke team because before this year, I thought that was the most talented Duke team that had ever been put on the court. In my opinion.
I love that comparison.
And that team only lost one game. Remember, that team just dominated through the regular season. And I compare this team a lot to that team. I think what makes this team a little bit more disappointing in my eyes is that, when you really look at it, this team didn't win a conference regular season title. They didn't really win a tournament title. So there's really no real accolade to put behind this team. Even last year's team, which was disappointing, but for very different reasons. That team had an incredible run in Brooklyn. a 5 days in Brooklyn that was extremely memorable and unforgettable, So they had that. So that was your one kind of snapshot of that season. You could say, okay, well, they had that amazing run in Brooklyn. This team, they didn't really have that. I still don't get how they lost in North Carolina 2 out of 3 when I kind of felt like we were the better team every single time. And
they absolutely were.
And, and I just kind of felt like we just played down to teams this year. And that tends to happen a lot. I mean, everybody knows Duke gets everybody's best shot on a nightly basis. We understand that. But it just kind of felt like this year, just games that we should have easily won, we lost. And it wasn't because necessarily that team just played out of its mind. I just thought we played down to competition. So I think those are the two things that I kind of take out of this season, just the disappointment, and that it wasn't an accolade-filled team. They didn't have a regular season championship. They didn't have a conference championship. So I think that's what's going to kind of scar a lot of Duke fans when they look back at this team, decades from now, I guess. That this team really didn't really accomplish a lot when you look at the resume comparative to what they should have.
No, you're exactly correct. I think it's a fair thing to say. And if, you look at, these guys' careers, you look at Quinn Cook going into his senior year, what was the one thing that really everyone brought up to him and about him was, since he came in, he hadn't won an ACC regular season title.
Right.
He hadn't won an ACC tournament title, and he hadn't won a national championship going into his senior year, and that was the big thing. And Duke didn't win the regular season that year. They got bounced by Notre Dame in the ACC tournament, but then were able to go on a great stretch and win the title game. But I do think I loved what you said, that how it's the nature of the tournament that the best team doesn't always win. And I do think that's what people love about it so much. That's why people love, even you look at the NFL. Both things are a one game scenario.
Right.
Anything can happen in that one game scenario. If it were different, if it were more a baseball, hockey, NBA kind of thing, I do personally feel that the best teams usually win. If you look last year in the World Series, the Houston Astros were, to me, the best team in baseball. They had the most talent. They had pitching. They had everything. Mm-hmm. Golden State Warriors, even this year, I still think, although I do have to say, I do think Houston will give them a very good run for their money. But if I were picking right now, if Steph comes back fully healthy and everything's fine, I think they win the title, and that happened last year.
Right.
Hockey, the Penguins went on an unbelievable run. They played tremendous, and they played tremendous in the playoffs, and arguably in a 7-game series, the best team is going to win. That's generally what happens. But you look at these one-game scenarios, like if Duke played Kansas, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, do I think Duke beats them enough to advance and win, in a 5-game series, at least 3 games to 2? Absolutely. But the beauty of the tournament and the fact that it makes it so difficult to win titles, and the fact that Coach K has 5 is the fact that, you're off for one night. One thing goes wrong, one player gets injured, and you're back home waiting for the next season. It's truly tremendous, and all you have to look at there is just look at UVA, and not even just this year losing to UMBC, but in past years when every year they're an elite regular season team, which I know is sort of a backhanded compliment, but they're an elite regular season team. They're able. I mean, what do they have? 2 losses in the regular season this year.
Yeah,
playing elite defense. Not obviously. I didn't have them going too far simply because I think when it comes down to March, you need to be able to put the ball in the hole. You need to be able to score, and they frankly just didn't do it enough. Obviously, I didn't see them losing in the first round to a 16 seed, but
right.
It just shows how really difficult it is to win in a scenario where you have to win 6 straight games and you're not allowed to lose one.
Absolutely. That's a hell of a point. Absolutely. I can't disagree more. I can't agree more, should I say. So kind of to wrap this up as far as the Duke conversation. So where do you see, you watch these guys a lot as I did. What do you see the trajectory of the careers of these four guys? I will say that out of the one disappointment of this season, I was a little disappointed with Trayvon Duval. I kind of felt like he was the biggest disappointment of the big four. It just kind of felt like he was consistently inconsistent this year. He had moments where he was tremendous, and then he had moments where you're just like, what the F are you doing? He was, yeah, that's the best way I can put it. I mean, it was just like, he was.
Absolutely. I think I personally have to agree with you. Like you said, to wrap this up, and I'm assuming, their trajectories for their NBA career.
Right. Right.
It's interesting, and the one thing I would like to preface this with is there's only one somewhat of a question mark, and that's Gary Trent Jr., whether or not he's going to stay or leave. Personally, I think that he's going to leave since he had a tremendous season. He's got the physical build to play in the NBA. He can shoot, he can pass, he can drive the ball. He's got a great mid-range game. He can finish around the basket, but
not projected highly, though. At least if you look at some of the mock drafts, he's not exactly. I think he's predicted right at the end of the lottery, or like right outside of it. I mean, obviously we're in late March, April, so a lot of things can change from now to June. So, but right now, I don't think he's predicted highly. So I think that might kind of sway his opinion. I agree with you. I think they all go, but Gary is kind of the one guy that you could see maybe staying.
Right, and to that point, there have been, you look at all the different mock drafts and whatnot, and there's some that have him, late first round. Well, a lot of them have him, some have him around the end of the lottery, some have him late first round, some have him not in the first round.
Yeah, I don't understand those. I'm like, whoa.
And yeah. I think what we will see is, personally, I think he'll declare for the draft, but not sign with an agent.
Mm-hmm.
Get the feedback, see what they're saying, and if he gets the answer that he likes, and I'm assuming that would be guaranteed first round, or around lottery to the early 20s, mid 20s, I do think he leaves. But to get to your question, I personally, what Marvin Bagley did this season was unbelievable. Something that, there wasn't a time, Duke's gotten some unbelievable recruits. Watching Jason Tatum play was great.
Right.
Watching, Jaleel and Tyus and Justice, all those guys.
Kyrie.
Kyrie.
For the 11 games, anyway.
For the 11 games. And, Austin Rivers, watching him, the way he was able to score the ball with ease was great to watch. But there was no one that I sat there and watched, and I was like, I can't believe this guy's in a Duke uniform. And I'm able to watch him play like it was with Marvin Bagley. But with that said, I would not be surprised if Wendell Carter Jr. had either a better NBA career or a similar NBA career with regards to points and rebounds than with Marvin Bagley. I think Wendell's game is suited beautifully for the NBA. He has a beautiful 3-point shot. He showed that he could hit the mid-range. I think he's a better rebounder than Bagley is. Bagley relies solely on his athleticism, which is, through the roof. Don't get me wrong. But Wendell's positioning, the way he was able to play defense, he's extremely athletic. But his timing on blocks, his positioning, I thought was absolutely tremendous. And, he has more polished post moves that you can go with either hand.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, I'll be honest, I don't think we saw Marvin Bagley use his right hand outside of dribbling once this year to finish around the basket. I can't honestly remember it. Even when he would go right, he would come back and finish with his left. But obviously, with that said, I think Marvin Bagley is going to be an unbelievable NBA player. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Wendell Carter enjoy similar success.
The only thing not to cut you off, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, you're good.
The only thing I would disagree with the Wendell and the Marvin comparisons is I think Marvin has more of the alpha dog presence. One of the things that bothered me with Wendell this year was that, and I don't know if it was by design or whether he was just kind of taking a back seat to Marvin, but there were times where I thought that he could have taken over games and he just could have dominated games if he wanted to, and he didn't. And I felt like Marvin has more of that kind of alpha dog, like, give me the ball, get the hell out of my way, I'm going to score on anybody. Like, when he really, and it always kind of felt like you were waiting for that out of Wendell, and it never, I mean, he had his moments and he had his time when he did that, but through a course of a 30, 32 game regular season, those were times where those were few and far in between. And I think that's my only criticism with Wendell, is that I don't see that like alpha dog mentality. And I think that's a lot of that has to, and that's a variable that I think a lot of people don't talk about when they talk about guys and evaluating them in the NBA, especially when you're talking about lottery picks, guys that are going to go in the top, 5 to 7 picks in the draft, as these two are predicted. Do they have that takeover ability? And that's the one thing that I'm still looking to see out of Wendell. And maybe he'll develop it. Maybe, he gets to an NBA team and he's the guy, and, maybe he'll develop that. But I think at Duke sometimes I think he was kind of, I don't know if he was I don't want to say content, but I think he was more than willing to kind of play second fiddle to Marvin Bagley.
I think that's a tremendous point, and I agree with you with what you were saying about NBA scouts and how they may not necessarily look for that, and they instead look for the raw talent, which obviously they're in a scenario where you accumulate, or most teams try to accumulate the best talent and whatever their reasoning may be. But that's a terrific point. I absolutely agree with you that Bagley was, and he showed it against UNC. Get me the ball, get out of the way. Everyone just jump on my back. I got you guys. Don't worry. And I think that goes a long way. I think it's extremely interesting. It'll be interesting to see where they end up.
And I think the upside too.
Go ahead.
And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off again. I think the upside also plays into it because I think.
Of course.
I think different than the NFL, where I think upside and what you see right now, I think it's all a combination. I think in the NBA, I think they draft specifically on upside. I think they want to see, I think GMs are going to look at Wendell and they're say, yeah, right now he's probably more polished offensively, but in 5 years, what's Marvin Bagley going to be? I mean, he's give us Marvin Bagley, and in 5 years we're going to make it. I think that's their mentality. So I think that's going to hurt them a little bit in that they might view Wendell more as a more finished product right now as opposed to Bagley. So I think that might play into it, but I agree with you. I was a huge fan of Wendell this year, and I was more disappointed that he didn't assert himself more in games and didn't kind of be, because I thought at times, even with Bagley on the court, I thought sometimes he was the best player on the court, and it was disappointing that he did play second fiddle to. And plus, I think Bagley has more of the flashy style, the flashy game, the leaping ability, while Wendell's more of your traditional, back to the basket big, in that general sense, kind of a more bigger, lumbering type of guy. So I think that kind of hurt his appeal to some Duke fans. But I don't know if you got to see Ayton much, but go ahead. No, I've been constantly watching these two all year because these have been the two guys that have been primarily. I know Porter at the beginning of the year before he got hurt were guys mentioned as top picks, but I was watching Bagley and Ayton, and I got into a lot of debates with a lot of friends of mine and people that listen and whatnot. I think I love Ayton, but Bagley's on another level in my opinion. I just think Bagley right now, if I was a GM, I would take Bagley in a heartbeat.
Well, obviously, I've watched it.
And I know it's a little biased because I'm a Duke fan.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've watched it a lot more of Marvin Bagley than I have of DeAndre Ayton, but solely from what I've seen, what I've heard, I understand why NBA scouts and people are saying Ayton's going to go number one. Because I think honestly, Marvin's probably more athletic than Ayton is. Ayton is still a tremendous athlete, but watching Bagley play and and then watching Ayton, they're extremely similar players.
They are.
In that, you put Ayton in the post and it's almost like, you could put the points up on the board, it's over. And Ayton's got a beautiful jump shot that is, very consistent. He's able to knock it down very easily, honestly. And, that was sort of the knock a bit on Bagley was, he's not a great 3-point shooter. He shot a very good, I don't know exactly his percentage this year, but I know he shot a good percentage. He shot a high percentage around the basket. I think really what they're looking at here, and it goes to what we talked about kind of with Wendell and the polish, but I think this is more of a bodily polish, in that you look at DeAndre Ayton and you see how, he's unbelievably built. He's in unbelievable shape.
Yeah, I mean, he's a 19-year-old kid that looks like a 28-year-old. I mean, it's just it's sick.
He's the closest I've seen, probably. I guess you could say a current Bismack Biyombo or someone like that, where broad shoulders, kind of looks like a Dwight Howard out there.
Yeah, that's a hell of a comparison.
Strictly from from eye purposes, looking at him. So you look at them, similar skill sets. So, again, with Bagley being more athletic, I think it makes a ton of sense to me that teams are saying, hey, this guy is it. He's the full package. He does everything Bagley does, plus he's got all of this, weight and strength to him. I get it. Personally, obviously, I take Bagley because I think what he does on the court is unbelievable. But I think Ayton has him beat on defense, and that's honestly that was Bagley's biggest knock this year. Is he was not a good defender.
No, he was not.
Put it simply.
Yeah.
But if you're going by that, I guess you could say I understand why Ayton, I think, will go number one. But I wouldn't be surprised if we look later on and say, well, I would have taken Bagley in that situation. And
the one thing about Marvin that I was impressed with, he was able to dominate without really getting a lot of touches, without really getting a lot of plays ran for him. And that's the interesting part. I mean, I didn't watch Arizona enough to really understand the dichotomy of how many plays, DeAndre Ayton got ran for him as opposed to some, Trier or some of the other guys. But I think you would find it interesting that I would guess that Ayton probably got more touches and more plays ran for him than Bagley did at Duke. And the fact that he was able to really get his and dominate, not just score, but dominate offensively without really getting plays ran for him, without really getting touches a lot. I mean, that to me is the scary part about Bagley, that I think his game is still developing. Like, that's the scary part.
That's freaky. That's scary to think because you look and Jay Billis and all that talks about his ability to get offensive rebounds. His second jump after missing a shot was second to literally none. I don't know if even in the NBA who has a better second jump than he does. I can't think of anyone.
Yeah.
He's simply tremendous, but sort of, getting back to your first point and, where I think these guys were gonna become in their NBA careers, just to sort of finish that off, I think Gary Trent's gonna be a really, really solid NBA player.
I agree.
He's your 3 and D guy.
Yeah.
He knocks down threes, but he's much more than that. But by getting to the basket, like I said, his mid-range game, when he missed a mid-range shot, I was frankly surprised when he did, because he was so unbelievably consistent.
And he had that little floater too, that little floater in the lane. That was
the
also
floater he had. And then the way he was able to play defense, lockdown defense, early on in the season he got big stops, but I think he'll be a really, really solid, really good NBA player. And the one that's sort of the toss-up is Trey Duval, because he has all of the physical abilities. He has lightning quick speed. He, had some trouble finishing around the basket. There were times when he finished around the basket, it was simply spectacular.
Right.
He would take, big dunks or finishing, with a little English up on the glass and in.
You know who he reminds me of? You know who he reminds me of? And obviously he's not as dynamic as this guy or as just ferocious as this guy, but he reminds me of a lesser Westbrook in college. That's what he reminds me of. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be Russell Westbrook, obviously.
Of course not. Right.
But I mean, if you go back and you study Russell Westbrook and you study I always mispronounce. I want to call him Trevin, call him Trayvon. When you go back and analyze Westbrook and then you look at Duvall, I mean, their games are similar. I mean, they have, I think, similar. Obviously, Westbrook's just light years. I mean, ahead of offensively and athletically, I think Westbrook's light years ahead, but not by much. I mean, Duvall is athletic as hell. And he's boom or bust for me because I agree with you. He's a toss up. I think it depends on where he goes, and how his development goes. Cause I mean, I think he has a chance to be better than all of these guys in the NBA if he develops the way that I think he can. I think he has a chance to really be a phenomenal talent in the league. It's just a matter of he has to improve his jump shot. That is the one thing for him.
I was going to say
absolutely. Yep.
There are two things for me that Trey, if he can become an all-star NBA point guard.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
It's his decision making.
Yep.
For number one, because there were times when he was out there and he threw passes that you were like, oh my God, that is, one of the most beautiful passes, the way he thread the needle. How did he find that, man? That was amazing. To throwing a lob from, to someone that hits off, the top corner of the backboard.
Right.
And you're like, what the hell are you doing? Like, what is this? So if he shores that up, and I do think that'll come with experience and obviously playing with an NBA coaching staff or wherever he winds up. And the second one, like you said, it's his shooting ability. He showed in the tournament, hey, you know what? I know he doesn't have a reputation as being a great shooter, and he had the eye troubles and all that stuff, but if he's able to knock down jump shots, and you saw this, I said early on in the season, I said all along, if you have, his prototype should be John Wall. In his college game, he had no jump shot whatsoever. To now, where if you leave him open, if you give him, a couple inches, he's going to pull up for a three. Yeah. And that's the way John Wall is now. I think Trey has a trajectory that could intersect that of John Wall, but also, if you look at it, the only reason this name's coming up is because I've seen it recently. You don't want him to, but it could be a Johnny Flynn type of situation where nothing really amounts. But obviously, we hope for the best, and he has all the physical gifts to be great. But he's definitely a boomer bust guy. I like that you said that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's transition. Before we transition over to baseball, real quick, got a Final Four prediction for me? I know it sucks that we're not in it, but still got to talk about the Final Four. So just give me your Final Four pick. What do you next Monday? Come this time Monday night. Who do you see hoisting up that trophy?
Well, I think in a Villanova Kansas matchup, I have Villanova because look, if Duke were to be able to play defense in a man-to-man, that's how I'd want them to play. Mm-hmm. Obviously, other than like the UVA type of defense, their defense still allows for them to play consistently well offense, and having a guy like Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges and all those guys, they're unbelievable. I do think that they'll wind up beating Kansas, and boy, that the other side of the bracket between I had Michigan in my Final Four, I had Villanova, and I had Duke and Arizona, but Arizona.
I did too, man. I did too, man. I know. I did too, man. I had the exact same Final Four.
Yeah, I kind of bought into the hype there, but Loyola Chicago against Michigan matchup, boy.
That is a toss-up. People are saying that I think Michigan's favored by 5 points or whatever. I think that's the spread. That's a toss-up game. Loyola's good, and I've been slow to the Loyola train. I was like, okay, nice little team, but that team is good. That team is a really, really good team.
And it's my dad said this to me, and I thought, he was like, they're a great team, and he said they're that. He's like, they're a team. That's what they have some big time players on that team. Some guys who have won state championships in high school. But boy, what John Beilein has, I don't know if there's a coach that gets his guys ready for March, at least in recent years, better than John Beilein.
I agree.
Because Michigan has been unbelievable. And, I mean, Wagner down there in the post and outside for three. I think it posed an interesting matchup, but if you're putting me on the spot, oh, man. I think I'll go with Loyola Chicago, but I think that at the end of the day, it'll be Villanova hoisting the title for what would that be? Second time in 3 years?
Second time in 3 years, yeah.
Jay Wright, I'll tell you what.
I've come around on Jay Wright. I've come around on Jay Wright because I used to kill Jay Wright. Even before I had a before I had a podcast, I used to kill Jay Wright because I was like, man, this guy, for all the accolades in the regular season, he never does anything in a tournament. And if he does it this year, that's 2 and 3. That's 2 and 3 years. So I got to shut the hell up.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Before they won that first title, if there was ever an upset pick, I was always taking Villanova. Because they
absolutely.
weren't the team that could get it done in the tournament, but he quickly turned that around. And if you look at the guys he's recruited, like obviously he has some great college players right now, but I mean, before he went to Villanova, I don't know, I personally didn't know who Dante DiVincenzo was, and now he's a unbelievably athletic guy. And even if you look, Jay Wright's not getting top 10, top 15 type recruits. Right. His guys are later on there, and he gets guys that fit into his system, and he makes it work. But at the end of the day, I would not be surprised, and frankly, at this point, is my prediction that Villanova will have 2 in the last 3 years.
If I had to give you my prediction, as much as I like Villanova, I just got a funny feeling that Kansas is going to do it this year. I'm a big believer, and I don't know, maybe you call me corny, whatever, but I'm a big believer in momentum in sports. And I just think, especially in a tournament like this, and I just feel like Kansas, they beat Duke in an emotional game. I think Kansas is going to be tough to beat from here on out. I just think Kansas, I would not be shocked if they beat Villanova. I think smart money is to pick Villanova, but I just got a funny feeling about Kansas. When you see these teams that kind of get over that hump, and the hump for Kansas was, they got to the Elite Eight 3 straight years. Kansas was in a lot of ways the new Villanova, a team that would always lose in upset picks. I've killed Bill Self for years that he's overrated, for all the talent that he's had at Kansas. He's never been able to win more than one national championship, blah, blah, blah. And the one national championship he won, lucky, blah, blah, blah. I've ripped him to shreds all these years. That being said, I like teams that get over a hump. I like teams that kind of that break a streak or a curse or get the monkey off the back, to use the sports cliche, whatever you want to say. And I just think Kansas is going to come into this game. They have nothing to lose. They slayed their dragon. They slayed their demon. I think they're going to be underdogs against Villanova. Everybody's going to be talking about how Villanova is the best team, blah, blah, blah. And I think Kansas is going to come in there, and I think they're going to be similar to Duke. I think they're going to shoot their threes. I think they'll play better offensively this game. I almost think that I think Villanova is almost a better matchup for them than I think even Duke was. And again, if you're asking me to bet, Villanova all the way. But I just have a funny feeling that Kansas is going to play in that game on Monday night. And then as far as Loyola and Michigan, I mean, again, smart money, Michigan. But Michigan hasn't played well this tournament. Like, they just outside of that Texas A&M game, I have not been impressed with Michigan, and I picked them to be in the final. I actually picked a Duke-Michigan final, and I just have not. I just haven't been impressed with Michigan. I feel like they just haven't played well. They haven't been offensively. They just haven't played well. I don't know. Sometimes that comes back to bite you. And, if they've been lucky to win a lot of the games they won. I thought they were lucky to win that Florida State game. I mean, if Florida State was even competent offensively, I thought Michigan could have lost that game. I thought Michigan could have lost that game, and they should have lost to Houston. So I just think I think we're gonna see a Loyola and a Kansas final on Monday night. I think you're going to see the ultimate Cinderella versus the ultimate blue blood on Monday night. I really do. I think, and then selfishly, I kind of want that for, the ratings and the storyline aspect of it. Cause I think that if you get that, I think that's going to rival the Duke Butler final of a few years ago.
Absolutely.
I just got a funny feeling, now also they're playing up the storyline of, Kansas is back in San Antonio where they won the Final Four in 2008. I just, sometimes in sports, stuff like this, it just, I don't know. Don't be surprised. That's all I'm saying. Don't be surprised.
Yeah. And I think they have what the 15 Duke team had, and I think Devontae Graham's their Quinn Cook. I think that's, just that senior guy right there.
And Newman's their X factor. If Newman plays like that, oh my God. People forget Newman was a 5-star recruit. People forget that about Newman.
Newman was a one and done. He was supposed to be a one and done at Mississippi State.
Yeah.
Couldn't get it done. And this is where I have so much respect for him. And how many kids would have left and gone, just left for the draft no matter what.
Absolutely.
He instead
stayed, transferred.
Yep. Takes a year off, and right now, obviously people like these, draft prospects and whoever in the draft scouts and for the NBA teams, what they like to see is, a guy with this potential who's, 18, 19 years old.
Right.
He realized, I didn't have a good year. I didn't play the way I can. So he bet on himself by skipping or by transferring, missing a year, and then right now in his what should be his age junior season,
right,
playing probably the best basketball he's ever played, and it's gonna pan out for him. And in maybe lottery pick, late first round.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. At worst, yeah, absolutely. He's an X factor for them. He's definitely an X factor for them.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, tomorrow is opening day. So just to transition, our Mets are opening up first time in really since 1960. Matter of fact, the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated. Fun fact. The first time in history, only the second time in history that all 30 teams will play on opening day. Sorry, I have to say the Nationals and the Reds was rained out, so that kind of got axed. But it would have been only the second time since 1968 that all 30 teams would play on opening day. But the Nationals, it was just announced earlier, I believe. Nats and the Reds tomorrow was rained out. So
were they really?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were just rained.
I'm at George Mason, so I'm about 40 minutes from DC. I'm actually going to be going to the Met games when they come to town. And
okay, cool.
And the way that they work around here when it comes to snow and rain doesn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah, I think it came down like not too long ago before we got on that they had rained that game out. So yeah, they're going to play it on Friday. So I tried to be all cool with a fun little fact, and then I thought about it. I was like, oh shit, they got rained out. But yeah, so it's the start of baseball season tomorrow. And before we get into our team, the Mets, just a quick synopsis of the offseason, because everybody's had an opinion on this crazy, not so crazy offseason with all these players not being able to get contracts. What's been your thought on this offseason? This new age the analytical offseason, as they're calling it, where, do you think it's an anomaly, or do you think it's a sign of things to come? What's been your thought process as you, me, all of us have watched this offseason play out, with the lack of free agent activity?
I think it's a sign of things to come.
Really?
Absolutely. I don't think it'll necessarily be indicative in next year's free agency when you have, the Machados and the Bryce Harpers and potentially Clayton Kershaw, guys like that, because frankly they're worth those huge contracts, and they've played their careers, and so far in their careers they have proven that they're worth those big numbers. But with the analytics and really everyone having the access to the exact same information, like obviously Moneyball and Billy Beane, he really used on-base percentage and all that kind of stuff, and scoring X amount of runs and getting on base, whatever it was. He used it to his advantage because at the time nobody else believed in that. No one else. They saw, a 250 hitter, and that was it. Meanwhile, it could be a 250 hitter who has like a 370 on base, and he saw value in that. But now, every general manager, every team is seeing the same value that he saw. So, by looking at those numbers, they're able to come up with, what certain players are worth. And they're all coming to roughly the same number. And it's frankly not the number that, Scott Boras wants for his clients. It's not the money that his clients want. They want more. Because if you look in the past, Major League Baseball is done with the Albert Pujols contracts, the Alex Rodriguez contracts. Those are done. Those aren't going. Even not maybe a Justin Upton contract. I think his now is fine, but
yeah.
But those huge contracts, those are going to be done, and that's simply because players are not being overvalued anymore. In the sense that when there was a superstar player, you paid him more than was necessary or more than he was worth, and from a pure statistical standpoint. And at the time, that's understandable. You want to get, obviously, we're Mets fans, you want to get Mike Piazza, and you want him to stay. You trade for him, great. At the end of the day, you have to sign him. And obviously, there's more that goes into it than the pure numbers. I'm one of the people who, I like analytics. I think they're useful when getting a snapshot of a player and his performance and whatever it may be. But if, maybe you look at the time, Mike Piazza, and you say, okay, well, based on the numbers, he's worth this. But obviously to the Mets, to Mets fans, he's worth well more than that.
Right.
He was worth, obviously he's Hall of Famer, unbelievable. But I think the trend now is people look at players that, like a Mike Moustakas, let's say, who hit for, a franchise record amount of home runs in a single season for the Royals.
Yeah.
Big part of them. Previously, I think he would have been paid a huge amount of money, and it was expected.
At a premium position, too. Third base.
Third base.
Yeah.
He's a pretty good defender, but, he's a relatively, mediocre average hitter. He doesn't get on base a lot. And
strikes out a ton.
Yeah. Getting on base is what a lot of teams, what they want from their players. So, I think that, this is really just a sign of things to come, and that's getting rid of the sure outliers that are Clayton Kershaw, Manny Machado, and Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper, I don't think he's had talks in the past of the $400, $500 million contracts. I think he's smarter than that, and Scott Boras is smarter than that to realize that, he's not going to get that kind of money. He will get a gigantic contract. I don't doubt it. But for everyone else, I think Jason Worth, who hasn't been that, he hasn't played that well for the Nationals in recent years, and he's getting older, just recently signed for a minor league deal. Previously, I think he would have gotten a major league deal solely based on his name. Same thing with, I think Ichiro got a major league contract, but it took him a while. So I think,
and it was Seattle. It was more of a sentimental thing, and it's Seattle. It was more of a sentimental thing more so than
absolutely. Absolutely. But I think players need to reevaluate how they value themselves and how much money they're asking for, frankly, because look, Eric Hosmer wanted whatever amount of money he wanted, $200 million, whatever it was, and he wanted 8 years for a guy who's 30, 31.
Well, he's 28. He's 28. Well, I will say, 28? Yeah, he's 28, and he's the guy that really surprised me in this offseason because I kind of felt like he would get the Jason Hayward treatment, and full disclosure, I think Jason Hayward is the worst contract in the history of baseball. the fact that the Cubs, and I love Theo Epstein. I think if he were to quit today, he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, he absolutely. But that to me is that's unforgivable. If I'm a Cubs fan with Theo Epstein, like the fact that guy got 8 years, $180 million. I mean, what were they smoking? It's Jason Hayward? I don't want to make that. I've ranted on that before. I'm not gonna get to that.
But no, that's where I think analytics got the best of the Cubs there.
Right. Yeah. Everybody saw the age and the defensive run saved and all that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's tremendous.
Yeah.
He's a great player. He's at whatever amount wins above replacement, whatever that even means, and all that. I'm not a huge fan of WAR myself, but look, I can tell you he's a great defender, but I could also tell you that he's not a big time hitter, and that he regressed from even his first 2 seasons hitting wise in the MLB. And if you're playing, look, there's a reason that certain guys don't play. That's who I was thinking. Juan Lagares, because I know we're both Met fans.
Oh God.
So I love Juan Lagares. He's a Gold Glove center fielder, unbelievable. But if you can't hit if you hit 230, you can't hit 240, 250. A Gold defense doesn't justify putting you out there.
Absolutely.
And that's a more dramatic case of that as opposed to Jason Hayward, but it's comparable. And but I do think that players had previously been overvalued, and a lot had been said of collusion or whatever people wanted to say. But
I don't. Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't buy into that. I
agree.
don't believe it. It's more just every team has the same way of valuing players, and they're not going to overpay for someone. They're willing to wait it out. And look, the way the Mets got Todd Frazier, instead of going out there paying $25, $28 million for 2 years, they got him for what, $16 million?
Yeah.
That's because that's what he's worth. He's not a high on base guy, or I think he's like a mediocre on base guy and doesn't hit for average, strikes out a ton, plays good defense.
Mm.
He's not worth $14 million a year, just to put it out there, plain and simple. And look, he's a great clubhouse guy, whatever. You can say whatever you want. I know Yankee fans especially say how huge he was in their playoff run, and I don't doubt that. I think there's a lot to be said for that.
But it's hard to pay on intangibles.
It's hard to justify, pay $30 million for someone like that.
Yeah. Right. No, I agree. I go a step further than you. I hate analytics. I hate sabermetrics. I hate it now. I understood it at a point, especially when the A's were doing it, because the A's were doing it out of necessity more than convenience. And I think that now everybody's doing it out of convenience and because it's this new toy and look at all this computer and analytics and oh my God, da, da, da. And I think people have gone in the extreme. And where, I cannot stand WAR. I think it's the stupidest, dumbest stat in the history of sports. This guy's worth a lot because wins above replacement. But you're not, the thing I don't like about WAR is Mike Trout has a WAR of 8, so that means he's 8 wins more valuable than a replacement. Well, what if the replacement is Juan Lagares? That's not an accurate statistic. Because of course we know that Mike Trout compared to Juan Lagares it's not even a comparison. So the stat is misleading in its own sense. It's not like you're saying, Eric Hosmer's WAR is at 8, and his replacement is, Gary Sanchez or somebody, it's not, that's what I'm saying. That's why I hate the stat. Overall, I mean, there's some things like OPS is fine, and I can't stand WAR. I think the WAR revolution, the WAR generation, they're so in love with it. It just drives me insane. That's a whole nother podcast episode. But I agree with you. I'm not as gun ho as you are that think this is the sign of things to come. I think next year will definitely be the year I'm going to be looking out for, because I think next year is what's going to sell one way or another. If this was a kind of a one-time anomaly, or this is the sign of things to come. Because I think next year, you got Donaldson, you got Machado, you've got, obviously potentially Kershaw, you've got obviously, Harper, Harvey, if he ever figures it out, we'll get to that. But, so next year I think will be the determining factor. But the one thing that the thing that has confused me, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this notion that this free agency class was terrible. And look, was it a star-studded free agency class? No. But I don't think it was a terrible free agency class. I mean, I think if you looked at this class compared to some of the other ones of the last few years, I mean, I think it's comparable. I mean, if this was 2 years ago, if you look at a free agency class that had Yu Darvish, Jake Arrieta, Eric Hosmer coming off a 38 home run season, a 28-year-old, or Moustakas coming off a 38 home run season. You look at a 28-year-old Hosmer. I mean, you look at these guys, you're sitting here saying like, oh, you're guaranteeing that Eric Hosmer is going to get a $20 million. Like you're guaranteeing that. You're guaranteeing that, at the very least, Moustakas is getting a Pablo Sandoval type contract, 5 years, $90 million. And I don't understand. It's interesting. I'm more interested and amazed at how this offseason played out. Like I don't really have one way or another to really analyze it because it's so foreign because I've never seen this type of treatment to players. And I mean, this is new to our lifetime as fans, where these players have completely, almost in the other direction, have been undervalued in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see, and I do agree with you. I think age definitely does play, and if it were a couple years ago that these guys would be getting bigger deals and whatnot, but I mean, it's the analytics rule baseball now. That's just the way it is. It's the way it's going to be for enough time until some other different advanced stats say otherwise, or there's some sort of a counter revolution to the numbers. But this is where they're at right now in baseball, and it's interesting. I think it's Greg Holland. Is it Greg Holland who's still out there?
Yeah, he's still out there. That's shocking to me.
That to me makes little to no sense. But if it means he comes to the Mets, I'm all for it.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. I think it's more to come on this issue. I really do. I think it's more to come. I think we haven't even scratched the surface of where we're going to go with this issue. And I will say this, if the one great thing that comes out of analytics and sabermetrics and all that is players getting evaluated, in my opinion, fairly, then I'm all for it, because I can't tell you how many times again, Jason Hayward, the fact that Jason Hayward got basically $180 million deal, it's a mind boggling. And I know that one was a little bit of a different circumstance. I think if it prevents guys like Pujols from getting $200 million for 10 years, if it prevents the Cano contracts, if it prevents these outlandishly tremendous, just absorbing, I'm running out of adjectives to describe the crazy level of contracts that these guys are getting, then I think that some good would come out of sabermetrics. I'll say that.
Yeah, I have nothing else really more to add to that other than I definitely agree. I think it's, we're valuing players more accurately than before, but I think we're still overanalyzing certain statistics.
I agree with you. That's a perfect way to put it. Yep. Yeah, well, if we transition over to our lovable Mets, I will say one team that really benefited this year from the depressed market, if you will, was the Mets. And I don't even want to get into the spending issues of the Mets and the Wilpons. That's a podcast episode in itself to talk about the Mets and the Wilpons. But
and you don't want to get me that angry.
Yeah. We've had a good show. We've actually agreed more often than not. So I would agree with you on the Wilpons, and you don't want to get me there either.
Yeah.
But where do you see this Met team this year? I think recently in the last couple of days, I've where the predictions have started coming out, I think a lot of people are kind of in a similar state with the Mets as far as they think the Mets will be better. Obviously, they see them being, anywhere from 82 and 80 to 87, 88 win team. And I think that's pretty fair, a fair assessment of the team. But where do you see the Mets It's just from everything that you've seen this offseason, how it played out, the moves that they've made, the roster as it's currently constituted. Where do you see this team going this year?
I have to say that actually I like the moves they made. I liked getting, a guy like Jason Vargas. Look, the Mets, you can never have enough pitching, and the Mets know that more than anyone with all the injuries they had last season, the year before. Having a guy like Vargas, who I know has had a freak injury, but previously had been, he can give you 150 innings plus, and he gets you somewhat, he'll give you those innings. He's pretty reliable to go, once every 5 days. And obviously that, the irony of that is, practically the second he signs with the Mets, he gets injured, but that's that. I liked, getting Frazier for that kind of value. I think it was great. I think Jay Bruce getting the amount he did at the time, I said, look, that could be, an underrated signing and what they got him for, and it turned out being one of the bigger contracts of the offseason.
Yeah, no, amazingly.
Not anything I expected, but I mean, we both know it doesn't need to be said, but I'll say it anyway. The season comes down to the pitching, like everyone else has been saying. I think, we still need to see what the Mets have, out of Noah Syndergaard, because to be completely honest, he's pitched one full season in his career, and that was 2016, and he was lights out. And obviously you look in spring, and he was lights out, and you have big hopes for him. But he was 2015 he came up, he was a rookie, didn't pitch the whole season. 2017 I was at the game, he got injured with when he tore his lat. That wasn't any fun, but but he's still, I guess you could say, a bit of a question mark, not as much as some of the other guys.
Right.
Jacob deGrom he's the ace of the staff. He's the guy. Absolutely love him. He's a bulldog. He just knows how to pitch.
Absolutely.
He's the one guy on this staff who I can easily say to you, he goes out there every fifth day, and you expect magic, and even if you don't get the magic, he, for the most part, can keep you in the game.
Absolutely.
And obviously then you get into Harvey, who, he recovered from his Tommy John, had a great 15. 16 was rough. He was injured, had that thoracic outlet syndrome surgery, then never really fully recovered from it. Now, I like where he's at currently. I think he's in a position, and there's a sort of satirical website, Mets Uncensored, that is honestly hilarious. But one of the guys I follow who writes for them, this guy Tom, said, a lot's been said that Matt Harvey doesn't need to be the Dark Knight, but he does need to be the Dark Knight, and I agree with him, because look, he's not going to come out here throwing 100 miles an hour. That's kind of beyond that's
right.
That's beyond him. He can't really physically do that anymore. But when Harvey's on his game, it's a different team. Because, look, he can still throw 95, 96. He can hit 97. That's plenty fast enough.
Yeah.
He needs to have that Dark Knight mentality.
Mm-hmm. That bulldog aspect.
Whoever comes up to bat, they don't stand a chance.
Right.
And you hope you can see that. Steven Matz, if he says he's healthy, and to me that's what matters. He wasn't healthy last year. 2016, I'm not convinced he was fully healthy. Last year, when the Mets tried to push him and really kind of saying he was soft and needs to be able to pitch through a little bit of pain, and wound up he was, had to get, had a nerve realigned and whatever that was. I think he says he's healthy. I'm confident that he can pitch well. Now, the fifth starter, love that they picked Seth Lugo. I love
Seth Lugo. I think he is so underrated. A guy that, to me, he has great stuff, and he doesn't get the buzz. And I get why he doesn't get the buzz that the other guys get, but I love Lugo. Lugo, every time he goes out there, he does something well. I mean, when he's healthy and when he's right, he pitches effectively. And I think if you give Lugo a spot in your rotation and you tell him to go out there for 30 to 32 starts, I think Lugo's a guy that can win you 12, 13 games. Easily.
Yes. Yeah. And the thing with Lugo also is I think that set a great example for this team. They said, look, this is an open competition. And they said it with the catching situation. They said it with the center field situation. They said it with the fifth starter with Zach Wheeler. Wheeler had an atrocious spring training. He did not pitch well. He didn't show anything. And look, this would have been the first time that the Mets, five, at one point, young, big-name starters would have all been in the same rotation, having the same turn in the rotation. And obviously that would have been unbelievable to see.
Right.
But Wheeler played himself out of that situation and forced the Mets' hand. And to Mickey Callaway's credit, to Sandy Alderson's credit, to the entire coaching staff, they said it's an open competition. And Lugo, frankly, won the job. And I still think their pitching staff is in a great situation.
I agree.
If they're all healthy, I think they can win. They can win enough games to make the playoffs. I do believe that. But coming off that, I love Brandon Nimmo. I think he has everything to be a very good leadoff hitter for this team. I think he plays a very good center field. And he, in spring training at least, was much more aggressive. Hitting when he got pitches to hit, he wasn't simply taking them like he did last year and trying to work walks in that sort of new model of the on-base percentage guy. He still gets on base a ton. He still has a great eye at the plate, but now he's attacking the pitches that he likes. And he earned the starting spot tomorrow. And I love it because, again, Juan Lagares was supposed to be given every opportunity to win the starting job, and, he was injured and whatnot, but he didn't hit in spring.
Yeah.
Much was made about his, adjusted swing, sort of to get a better launch angle, and, it didn't work out. And the catching situation, both catchers had actually really good springs in Kevin Plawecki and Travis d'Arnaud, but look, they said they were going to play the matchups, and the Mets are facing a righty tomorrow, Carlos Martinez, and frankly, Kevin Plawecki hits righties better than Travis d'Arnaud, so they're starting Plawecki. I love it. I think Mickey Callaway's done everything right so far, and handling injuries and handling DeGrom's injury, and Lagares and Dom Smith, all those guys. I think everything's been sort of going well. They have the pieces to definitely make the playoffs. I
agree with you. I completely agree. I know you brought up Wheeler. Where do you see Wheeler? I think he's a guy that I think we've all been. I agree. I don't understand. What is the apprehension? This was the Cardinals. He'd been a reliever 5 years ago. I don't understand it. All the talk that, well, they don't know if he'll handle it, or, they don't know if his arm, make him handle it. At some point.
If he wants to be a Major League Baseball player, then he should be able to handle it.
I completely agree. To me, I think that I'll go out on a limb and say, I think if he's a reliever, he can be a Wade Davis type. I mean, he can be just absolutely just disgusting. I mean, people forget Wade Davis was a Zach Wheeler. He was a guy that threw hard. Well, he didn't throw as hard as Wheeler, but he was a guy that had just was an enigma as a starting pitcher. I mean, he had his moments, he had flashes, but was a guy that just could never put it together. What happens? He goes to Kansas City. They finally have a bright idea. Let's just put this guy in the bullpen. What happens? He starts throwing 97, 98, a 4-pitch arsenal, and just the guy is just a monster in the bullpen. I don't understand what is the apprehension with putting this guy in the bullpen. I mean, I really don't get it.
My only prediction, my only guess would be a better way to put it. My only guess is, with, the thin amount of starting pitching that they have, and that's for everyone. Every team is thin in starting pitching, no matter how many they have. They want to keep him there, but I think they have enough in, Lugo and Vargas and Gazelman and guys like that where they can afford to. I don't understand. I think he could be a Wade Davis type. I agree.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. What do you see? And we're going to wrap it up here shortly. Where do you see the whole David Wright situation? I'm almost at the point now where I kind of feel, and I hate to say this because I'm a Met fan. I love David and everything that he's meant to not just the organization but the city. I almost feel like it's time for and I know it's hard to say this because you can't tell a guy when to hang it up or when it's time to go. But I almost feel like the Mets are going to have to step in at one point and say, Dave, enough. Like almost like an intervention type of thing where like we can't even stomach seeing you continue to try to do this anymore. Like even from the business, and I'm sure that the Mets, if you gave them truth serum, they would love to get rid of that contract, obviously. But I mean, even beyond that, at this point, from just a human aspect, I think the Mets are going to just have to step in and say, Dave, enough is enough. Like it's not going to happen. It just isn't. You know, and I feel like it's a black cloud. I don't want to say it's a black cloud, or maybe a gray cloud over the franchise right now, that I kind of feel like this team really can't even move forward in a lot of ways, because it kind of feels like the David Wright cloud is still kind of hanging over the franchise in a lot of ways.
Well, I think a big step was made this offseason in sort of getting rid of that black cloud, only because if they still had any sort of belief that David could come back in the near future, Todd Frazier would have never been signed.
Right.
Which I think is a very good thing. Look, I grew up in sort of the David Wright era of things. You know, the 06 playoffs. I was 10 years old at the time.
Wow.
So yeah,
you're making me feel old right now, man.
Young buck. Yeah. So
I was 20 at the time. Oh no, I was what? Yeah, I was 20 at the time. I was about to turn 20. Amazing.
Yeah, see, I grew up. That's what I grew up on. You know, so you grew up in the Piazza era,
right?
Of the Mets. So he was the guy, and it was obviously sad to see him leave. I was crying when he left. Piazza is my favorite all time Met. But when it comes down to it with David, they have the insurance on his contract. They only pay a couple $1 million on it. Okay, that's fine. But when David can't get out of bed some days, when he can't pick up his daughter, when he's trying day after day to just be able to do baseball activities, and he constantly gets shut down.
Right.
It gets to the point where you don't want to say, okay, well, he's a waste of a roster spot, because that's not the case here. Because, look, he's on the DL, whatever, it's fine. But for his own physical health, for his own personal health, he said he's giving it another try because he doesn't want to have the regret. And honestly, I can't blame him. But I do think that if sooner rather than later he doesn't, decide to retire, I think a frank discussion needs to be made, because it's not only affecting the team, but when it affects your personal health, and you have a little girl at home that you can't pick her up, that's a problem. And David knows that, but look, he has the mentality. He's an athlete. He's a competitor and wants to compete. And he has that drive. And, it's difficult to hang up. You look at guys who played full careers who can't hang it up.
Right.
And David was on a Hall of Fame trajectory without a doubt. I think Joel Sherman put that out there. He told David that when he was talking to him, said, put his numbers up against, guys like George Brett and Scott Rowland.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his first 4 or 5 years in the league, I mean, he was 30 home runs, a 320 batting average. I mean, and people forget David was a very, very good defensive third baseman as well. He always had some issues with the throws, but for the most part, as far as his footwork and the glove and just the overall ability to play the position, I mean, he was great. It's sad. It really is depressing and sad that his career has been cut short. And
I honestly have never seen. Have you ever seen anyone better on attempted bunts or little hits down the third base line?
Then
and
David,
he comes down barehanded every single time.
Yep.
There's no one better. He perfected it early on from his career.
Yep. And
you look at the things that he did. He was unbelievable. But if I'm being frank, and I've been saying it maybe last year, 2 years ago, it's time. It's time.
I think one way or another, I think this is the year. I think if I was to give a prediction, I think either before the season ends or right after the season ends, I think a decision will be made one way or another. I just think, because at this point, if he doesn't play all year, which is obviously 99.9% the possibility, that's what, 3 years that he hasn't played a full season? No, almost 4, really, when you think about it. 2015, he didn't play a full season. 2016, outside of 20-something games, he didn't play a full season. He didn't play all last year. So, and then obviously this year, if he doesn't play an entire season, I mean, that's almost 4 seasons that he's just missed completely. I think this year, I really do think that this is the year. I think one way or another we'll get a resolution on David one way or another this year. And finally, we've gotten into Callaway. I was going to ask you about Callaway and what's your thoughts, but you kind of gave me your thoughts on Callaway, and I agree with you. He's definitely been a breath of fresh air. And I'll be honest, I was a little worried with the introductory press conference because the press conference with the positivity and we're going to love everybody. That was a little concerning from the corny aspect of things. But I've been impressed with what he's done. What's your biggest outside of the pitching? Because I think it's too easy to say the pitching. Obviously, we all know that the pitching is the number one reason why this team will either be a bad team or a really good team. What's the one X factor besides the pitching that you see that if that X factor turns out, will be the determining factor of this team being a playoff team?
The health of Yoenis Cespedes.
Okay.
He showed this preseason that when he's healthy, when he's playing, he's an elite talent. It's known. 2015, he carried the Mets to the playoffs, and then Daniel Murphy carried them the rest of the way.
Right.
That's without a question. But boy, even if you look at it, I saw some. I think MLB Network did their top 10 at each position thing, and I was surprised that Yo was on the list because he was injured basically all of last season. But if you look at his stats, for the limited time he played, he had really good stats. And then you look at his 2016 season when he hit 30 plus homers. Then 2015 again, big home runs, big RBIs. He was unbelievable, and having his presence in the lineup as opposed to not is so unbelievable. It's, day and night, hot and cold. Even with the new lineup that they have this year, if you take Cespedes out of it because of an injury, the Mets and Mickey Callaway believe in batting your best hitter second. Maximize number of at-bats he has, better RBI opportunities, whatever it is. You take Cespedes out of that 2 hole because he's injured. I guess you would put Jay Bruce batting second, and then everyone else kind of moves around. That's a completely different lineup.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it changes everything. And I think, if Yo can keep his legs healthy, keep himself, obviously his whole body healthy, but, his legs have been an issue. And, he looks like he doesn't look as bodybuilder-like as he did coming into last season. And that's a good thing because, at the end of the day, you're not a bodybuilder, you're a baseball player.
Right.
But when he's healthy, the man produces, and the man is just unbelievable. So I think he's other than the pitching staff, his health is the number one thing that, is the difference between the Mets making the playoffs and not.
I agree. I will say that if I had to pick, I'd say Conforto. I think to me, if Conforto is healthy, because I'm assuming obviously that Cespedes is going to play, and I think he'll be healthy this year. But to me, hoping obviously, but I think if Conforto is healthy, and all indications are that he's healthy, and obviously from his performance this spring, he looks like he's healthy, he looks like he's ready to go. If he's healthy, that's the X factor. Because when he's out there, when he's healthy, when he's right, he's their best pure hitter. He's without even. I could
watch his swing all day.
Right, absolutely. So if he's healthy, he's right. I think the sky's the limit for this team. I really do. If he's healthy and he's right, I think it's the sky's the limit for this team, and that's assuming the pitching staff performs the way it does. Obviously. Before we go, I need a World Series pick from you, and don't be afraid to say the Mets. Don't be afraid.
Oh, well, you have to know I pick the Mets every year.
Absolutely. I mean, I hate when fans say, well, how can you pick your team?
No reason to change it
exactly.
now. No reason to change it now. I'm saying the Mets are going to win the World Series.
Against who?
Ooh. I'll say, oh God, I mean, you can't pick against the Astros, can you? With Verlander, and Michael, and Correa, and Altuve, and Bregman at third, and
we haven't had a repeat champion in almost 20 years.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah.
Think about it.
That's interesting. But I'll say Mets Astros with the Mets coming out on top. That's more. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for sure.
Absolutely. Why not? Right? We got to have hope. As Met fans, we've been conditioned to have hope. Man. Why not? Right?
Yeah. I'd say.
Well, Dan, man, I thank you for so much time. We were only supposed to go a limited amount of time, and when you ended up doing 2 hours, man. So I thank you so much for that, man. It was great to have you on.
Anytime, Manny. I'm more than happy to do this. I appreciate it, my friend.
Hey, before you go, man, go ahead and plug your social media. Where can people find you, read your work, listen to your podcast, all that good stuff, man?
All right. Well, you can follow me. My personal account on Twitter is DansMets19. I think that tells you all you need to know. But thedukenation.com, the Duke Nation on iTunes, SoundCloud, all that stuff. That's where we have our podcasts. And we should be having some good guests coming on soon. Hopefully, some players who they're for the Duke women's team. Their careers have just ended with a tough loss to UConn. But if we're being frank, that's kind of expected.
Right.
We should have some people coming on as guests, and so the Duke Nation on Twitter, iTunes, SoundCloud, all that stuff. DansMets19 is my personal account. Yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome, man. Yeah, definitely go listen to Dan's podcast on SoundCloud and iTunes and everywhere you can find podcasts. Obviously, if you're a Duke fan, if you're not a Duke fan, I don't know why you would listen to a Duke podcast. Maybe just to hate, maybe just to be negative, like, oh, look at these Duke lovers. And,
yeah.
But yeah, man, if you're a Duke fan and you love all things Duke, he does really good work on that show. So go ahead and listen, go subscribe. Once again, man, thanks for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it, and we will definitely sometime throughout the season have you back on.
Sounds great, man. Anytime.
Absolutely, man.
Brothers and sisters, I don't know what this world is coming to.
Foul of the week. And my foul of the week goes to this week to Leonard Hamilton and his apology. And not to the actual apology, but the fact that he actually had to issue an apology. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, on Saturday night, late in the Elite Eight game between Michigan and Florida State, with 11 seconds left, Michigan gets the rebound off a Florida State miss. Florida State decides not to foul and instead let the clock run out, basically conceding the game. Game's over. Michigan goes on to win. So after the game in the post-game show, Kenny and Charles basically make a big deal saying, why didn't they foul? They should have fouled there in that situation. 11 seconds left. You never know what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And I will agree. And I will agree for the most part that they probably should have fouled, but I can see not fouling. I can see that basically, hey, the game's over. It's a two possession game. The game is basically over. And it just blew up like this big thing. Why didn't they foul? Oh my God. What message is that sending? You basically conceded the game. 11 seconds. There's too much time left. First of all, it was an overrated thing. I mean, geez Louise. It's at best barely debatable whether he should have fouled or not. And even if he does, there's no guarantee that they're making a comeback in that game. First of all, Florida State can't score. Everybody knows that. And Michigan's a very good offensive team and is a very good foul shooting team. So Michigan's going to most likely hit those free throws. And it's going to be what, a 3 possession game? At that point, it's a 7-point game. What is it? Still a 2.5 possession game. I just didn't understand the outrage. So anyway, come to post game, they have the little locker room area interview with the coaches, and Dana Jacobson basically asks him first question in. Guys in the studio basically felt that, why didn't you foul there with 11 seconds left in the game? And Leonard Hamilton was pretty funny, I will admit, in the post game, because he looked like he just like, what? Bitch, what? Why are you asking me? Like, he basically had that reaction, basically. And basically got ripped to shreds on Twitter. Oh, he's being sexist and he's being dismissive of Dana Jacobson. And first of all, I love Dana Jacobson. I miss her on the old cold pizza days. Dana Jacobson's the homie. I love Dana Jacobson. I think she does a good job. But this idea that Leonard Hamilton was dismissive and, Stephen A. Smith ranting about Leonard Hamilton, his behavior. I'm like, can we stop with the overly politically correct environment and world that we are just trying to live in? Stop. It is enough. He didn't do anything wrong. Okay. Maybe in a perfect world, you handle that situation a little bit better. You just shut up, answer the question and move on. Was it a big deal in the grand scheme of things? No. But I mean, this idea that Leonard Hamilton has to actually issue an apology, because, oh my God, he was so disrespectful to poor Dana Jacobson. How can you do that? How can you treat her that way? How can you be so dismissive of her and yada yada and this and that? I mean, can we stop, please? Can we stop? Can we stop living in this overly politically correct society where every little thing, every little action, every little display, every little thing is going to be taken to the nth fucking power? Like, stop it already. Oh my God. The fact that this man, so of course he gets abused online and then Leonard Hamilton has to issue an apology to Dana Jacobson. I'm like, really? Really? Is this the world we're living in? And I know I rant on this about every other show I ask about the overly politicized world that we live in. But I mean, really, it wasn't a big deal. Okay. He probably could have handled it better. Maybe after the fact, okay, hey, Leonard, maybe you want to act a little bit different in that situation. Somebody talks to him. Okay, fine. But to go out there and issue an apology, I mean, really? That's my foul of the week. Leonard Hamilton's apology. Because it was fucking ridiculous. Ridiculous that he had to actually issue an apology. Because I've seen coaches do, fuck, Greg Popovich. Greg Popovich does way worse. He's more dismissive of fucking sideline reporters than anybody else. Do we need to bring up Belichick? He's no day at the beach. But Leonard Hamilton has to issue an apology. Come on. Really? Anyway. I could rant about this issue for hours and hours on end, but I've already been here almost 2.5 hours, so I'm going to get the hell up out of here. Thank you for listening as always. I want to thank Dan Labriola for joining me on the show. I was only supposed to keep him on for maybe 25 minutes or so, a quick spot, and it ended up being almost an hour and a half. So I thank him for his time. He's real gracious. Hope you guys enjoy that. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. I appreciate you guys' support. Of course, we would never have a podcast without you guys. So thank you for listening. Keep supporting the show. I will be back as always next week with another episode of the podcast. Until then, have a nice weekend. Have a nice Easter weekend. Be blessed. Eat a night, go to church, go do all that good stuff and enjoy time with your family. Hopefully everybody enjoys the Final Four this weekend. Should be 2 pretty good games, I would think. I'm going to have a hard time watching it, of course, because I'm still in mourning. But, yeah, man, happy Easter, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Be safe, be blessed, all that good stuff. And, for Dan Labriola, I am Manny Fresh. I am out. Peace.